Hello, this thing on. Phew, here goes nothing. Silly guy, 99 over here. You get the idea. You know the drill already. We're gonna be reading this book. The House of Spiders. No, The King in Yellow. Okay, the Prophet's Paradise. If but the vine and love abjuring band are in the Prophet's paradise to stand. Alack, I doubt the prophet's paradise were empty as the hollow of one's hand. Oh, holy bars. So last time what happened, some guy lived with this girl, he fell in love and then he died. In the studio, he smiled, saying, seek her throughout the world. I said, why tell me of the worlds? My world is here, between these walls and the sheet of glass above. Here among gilded flagons and dulled jeweled arms, tarnishing frames and canvases, black chests and high-backed chairs, quaintly carved and stained in blue and gold. For whom do you wait? He said, and I answered, when she comes I shall know her. On my hearth a tongue of flame whispered secrets to the whitening ashes. In the street below, I heard footsteps, a voice, and a song. For whom then do you wait? He said, and I answered, I shall know her. Oh, oops, I already read that. I knew the song, but neither the steps nor the voice. Fool, he cried, the song is the same, the voice and steps have but changed with years. On the hearth a tongue of flame whispered above the whitening ash, wait no more, they have passed, the steps and the voice in the street below. Then he smiled, saying, for whom do you wait? Seek her throughout the world. I answered, my world is here between these walls and the sheets of glass above, here among gilded flagons and dull jeweled arms, tarnished frames and canvases, black chests and high-backed chairs, quaintly carved and stained in blue and gold. Why'd he repeat it? The phantom of the past would go no further. If it is true, she sighed, that you find Let you find in me a friend. Let us turn back together. You will forget here under the summer sky. I held her close, pleading, caressing. I seized her, away with anger, but she resisted. If it is true, she sighed, that you find me in a friend, then let us turn back together. The phantom of the past will go no further. Whoa. The studio, the past, the phantom, the sacrifice. I went into a field of flowers whose petals are whiter than snow and whose hearts are pure gold. For our field, a woman cried, I have killed him I loved. And from a jar she poured blood upon the flowers whose petals are whiter than snow and whose hearts are pure gold. Far afield I followed, and on the jar I wrote 1,000 names, while from within the fresh blood bubbled to the brim. I have killed him I loved, she cried. The world's athirst, now let it drink. She passed, and far afield I watched her pouring blood upon the flowers whose petals are whiter than snow and whose hearts are pure gold. Destiny. I came to the bridge which few may pass. Pass, cried the keeper. But I laughed, saying, there is time. And he smiled and shut the gates. To the bridge which few may pass came young and old, all were refused. Idly I stood and counted them, until, wearied of their noise and lamentations, I came again to the bridge which few may pass. Those in the throng about the gates shrieked out, he comes too late. But I laughed, saying, there is time. Pass, cried the keeper as I entered, then smiled and shut the gates. Oh, did that say destiny? I don't get what's happening. The throng. There, where the throng was thickest in the street, I stood with a Pierrot. All eyes were turned on me. What are they laughing at? I asked. He grinned, dusting the chalk from my black cloak. I cannot see. It must be something droll, perhaps an honest thief. All eyes were turned on me. He has robbed you of your purse, they laughed. My purse, I cried. Pierrot, help, it is a thief. They laughed. He has robbed you of your purse. Then Truth stepped out holding a mirror. If he is an honest thief, cried Truth, Pierrot shall find him with this mirror. But he only grinned, dusting the chalk from my black cloak. You see, he said, Truth is an honest thief. She brings you back your mirror. Arrest Truth, I cried, forgetting it was not a mirror but a purse I lost, standing with Pierrot there where the throng was thickest in the street. The jester. Was she fair, I asked, but he only chuckled, listening to the bells jingling on his cap. Stabbed, he tittered. Think of the long journey, the days of peril, the dreadful nights. Think how he wandered for your sake, for her sake, year after year, through hostile lands, yearning for kith and kin, yearning for her. Stabbed, he tittered, lingering to the bells jingling on his cap. Was she fair, I asked, but he only snarled, muttering to the bells jingling on his cap. She kissed him at the gate, he tittered, but in the hall his brother's welcome touched his heart. Was she fair, I asked. Stabbed, he chuckled. Think of the long journey, the days of peril, the dreadful nights. Think how he wandered for her sake. Year after year, through hostile lands, yearning for kith and kin, yearning for her. She kissed him at the gate, but in the hall his brother's welcome touched his heart. Was she fair? I asked, but he only snarled, jingling to the bells jingling in his cap. Am I supposed to be continuously repeating these? The green room. The clown turned his powdered face to the mirror. If to be fair is to be beautiful, he said, who can compare with me in my white mask? Who can compare with him in his white mask? I asked of Death beside me. Who can compare with me, said Death, for I am paler still. You're very beautiful, sighed the clown, turning his powdered face from the mirror. The love test. If it is true that you love, said Love, then wait no longer. Give her these jewels, which would dishonor her and so dishonor you in loving one dishonored. If it is true that you love, said Love, then wait no longer. I took the jewels and went to her, but she trod upon them, sobbing, Teach me to wait, I love you. Then wait, if it is true, said Love. The Street of the Four Winds. I don't even want to read that. For me tes yuk a demi, croix te bras, ser ton sien, et de ton cœur endormi, chassé à jamais tu dessein. Je chantais la nature, les étoiles du soir, les larmes du matin, les couchers de soleil à l'horizon lointain. La ciel qui parlait à cœur des existences futures. What does it mean? Look at your eyes, something something. Look in your slumbering heart. Jamais, I don't know, I don't remember. Look at, listen to the singing of nature, the stars of the night, and the something of the morning. The ears of the sun of a horizon something. The sky speaks to your heart of the existence of the future. Something like that. The Street of the Four Winds. The animal paused on the threshold, interrogative, alert, ready for flight if necessary. Servern laid down his pallet and held out a hand of welcome. The cat remained motionless. Her yellow eyes fastened upon Severn. Puss, he said in his low, pleasant voice, come in. The tip of her tail twitched uncertainly. Come in, he said again. Apparently she found his voice reassuring, for she slowly settled upon all fours, her eyes still fastened upon him, her tail tucked under her gaunt flanks. He rose from his easel smiling. She eyed him quietly, and when he walked toward her, she watched him bend above her without a wince. Her eyes followed his hand until it touched her head. Then she uttered a ragged mew. It has long been Severn's custom to converse with animals, probably because he lived so much alone. Now he said, what's the matter, Puss? Her timid eyes sought his. I understand, he said gently. You shall have it at once. Then, moving quietly about, he busied himself with the duties of a host. Rinsed a saucer, filled it with the rest of the milk from the bottle on the windowsill, and kneeling down, crumbled the roll into the hollow of his hand. The creature rose and crept toward the saucer. With the handle of a palette knife, he stirred the crumbs and milk together and stepped back as she thrust her nose into the mess. He watched her in silence. From time to time, the saucer clinked upon the tiled floor as she reached for a morsel on the rim. And at last the bread was all gone. Her purple tongue traveled over every unlicked spot, until the saucer shone like polishing marble. Then she sat up, and coolly turning her back to him, began her ablutions. Keep it up, said Severn, much interested. You need it. She flattened one ear, but neither turned nor interrupted her toilet. As the grime was slowly removed, Severn observed her nature had intended her for a white cat. Her fur had disappeared in patches from disease or the chances of war. Her tail was bony and her spine sharp, but what charms she had were becoming apparent under vigorous licking, and he waited until she had finished before reopening the conversation. When at last she closed her eyes and folded her forepaws under her breast, he began again very gently, Buzz, tell me your troubles. At the sound of his voice, she broke into a harsh rumbling, which he recognized as an attempt to purr. He bent over to rub her cheek, and she mewed again, an amiable, inquiring little mew, to which he replied, certainly, you are greatly improved, and when you recover your plumage will be a gorgeous bird. Much flattered, she stood up and marched around and around his legs, pushing her head between them, and making pleased remarks, to which he responded with grave politeness. Now what sent you, he said, here into the streets of the Four Wind, and up 5 flights to the very door where you would be welcome? What was it that prevented your meditative flight when I turned from my canvas to encounter your yellow eyes? Are you a Latin Quarter cat or am I a Latin Quarter man? And why do you wear a rose-colored flower garter buckled about your neck? The cat climbed into his lap and was now sat purring as he passed his hand over her thin coat. Excuse me, he continued in lazy, soothing tones, harmonizing with her purring. If I seem indelicate, I cannot help musing on this rose-colored garter, flowered so quaintly and fastened with a silver clasp. For the clasp is silver, I can see the mint mark on the edge, as is prescribed by the law of the French Republic. Now why is this garter woven of rose silk and delicately embroidered? Why is this silken garment with its silver clasp about your famished throat? Am I indiscreet when I inquire if its owner is your owner, if she some aged dame living in memory of youthful vanities, fond, doting on you, decorating you with her intimate personal attire? The circumference of the garment would suggest this, for your neck is thin and the garter fits you. But then again, I notice most things. The garter is capable of being much enlarged. The small silver-rimmed eyelets, of which I count 5, are proof of that. And now as I observe that the 5th eyelet is worn out, as though the tongue of the clasp were accustomed to lie there, that seems to argue a well-rounded form. The cat curled her toes in contentment. The street was very still outside. He murmured on. Why should your mistress decorate you with an article most necessary to her at all times? Anyway, at most times. How did she come to slip this bit of silk and silver around your neck? Was it the caprice of a moment when you, before you had lost your pristine plumpness, marched singing into her bedroom to bid her good morning? Her coiled hair tumbling to her shoulders as you sprang upon the bed, purring. Good day, my lady. Oh, it is very easy to understand, he yawned, resting his head on the back of the chair. The cat still purred, tightening and relaxing her padded claws over his knees. Shall I tell you all about her, cat? She is very beautiful, your mistress, he murmured drowsily, and her hair is heavy as burnished gold. I could paint her, not on canvas, for I should need more shades and tones and hues and dyes more splendid than the iris of a splendid rainbow. I could only paint her with closed eyes, for in dreams alone can such colors as I need be found. For her eyes I must have azure from skies untroubled by a cloud, the skies of dreamland. For her lips roses from the palaces of slumberland, and her brow snowdrifts from the mountains which towers in fantastic pinnacles to the moon. Oh, much higher than our moon here, the crystal moons of dreamland. She is very beautiful, your mistress. The words died on his lips and his eyelids drooped. The cat, too, was asleep, her cheeks turned upon her wasted flank, her paws relaxed and limp. They both die, also W Riz. I'm gonna steal that pickup line for when I talk to a girl. It is fortunate, said Severn, sitting up and stretching, that we have tided over the dinner hour, for I have nothing to offer you for supper but what may be purchased with 1 silver franc. The cat at his knees rose, arched her back, yawned, and looked up at him. What shall it be? A roast chicken with salad? No? Possibly you prefer beef, of course. And I shall try an egg and some white bread. Now for the wines. Milk for you? Good. I shall take a little water, fresh from the woods, with a motion toward the bucket in the sink. He put on his hat and left the room. The cat followed to the door, and after he closed it behind you, she settled down, smelling at the cracks and cocking one eye at every creak from the crazy old building. The door below opened and shut. The cat looked serious for a moment doubtful, and her ears flattened in nervous expectation. Presently, she rose with a jerk of her tail and started on a noiseless tour of the studio. She sneezed at a pot of turpentine, hastily retreating to the table. Which she presently mounted, and having satisfied her curiosity concerning a roll of red modeling wax, returned to the door and sat down with her eyes on the crack over the threshold. Then she lifted her voice in a thin plaint. When Severn returned, he looked grave, but the cat, joyous and demonstrative, marched around him, rubbing her gaunt body against his legs, driving her head enthusiastically into his hand, and purring until her voice mounted to a squeal. He placed a bit of meat wrapped in brown paper upon the table, and with a penknife cut it into shreds. The milk he took from a bottle which had served for medicine, and poured it into the saucer on the hearth. The cat crouched before it, purring and lapping at the same time. He cooked his egg and ate it with a slice of bread, watching her busy with the shredded meat, and when he had finished and had filled and emptied a cup of water from the bucket into the sink, he sat down, taking her into his lap, where she at once curled up and began her toilet. Like grooming herself, they mean, or did he just shit all over her? Or did she just shit all over him? He began to speak again, touching her caressingly at times by way of emphasis. Cat, I have found where your mistress lives, and it is not very far away. It is here, under the same leaky roof, but in the north wing, which I had supposed was uninhabited. My janitor tells me this. By chance he is almost sober this evening. The butcher on the Rue de Seine, where I bought your meat, knows you, and the old Cabane, the baker, identified you with needless sarcasm. They tell me hard tales of your mistress, which I shall not believe. They say she is idle and vain and pleasure-loving. They say she is harebrained and reckless. Little sculptor on the ground floor. Little sculptor on the ground floor who is buying rolls from old Cabane spoke to me tonight for the first time, although we have always bowed to each other. He said she was very good and very beautiful. He has only seen her once and does not know her name. I thanked him. I don't know why I thanked him so warmly. Cabane said, into this cursed street of the four winds blow all things evil. The sculptor looked confused, but when he went out with his rolls, he said to me, I'm sure, monsieur, that she is as good as she is beautiful. The cat had finished her toilet and now, springing softly to the floor, went to the door and sniffed. He knelt beside her and, unclasping the garter, held it for a moment in his hands. Then after a while he said, there is a name engraved upon the silver clasp underneath the buckle. It is a pretty name. Sylvia Alvin. Sylvia is a woman's name. Alvin is the name of a town. In Paris, in this quarter above all, in the streets of the four winds, names are worn and put away as fashions change with the seasons. I know the little town of Alvin, for there I met fate face to face, and fate was unkind. But do you know that in Alvin fate had another name, and that name was Sylvia? He replaced the garter instead of looking down at the cat crouched before the closed door. The name of Alvin has a charm for me. It tells me of meadows and clear rivers. The name of Sylvia troubles me like perfume from dead flowers. The cat mewed. Yes, yes, he said soothingly, I will take you back. Your Sylvia is not my Sylvia. The world is wide and Alvin is unknown. Yet in the darkness and filth of poor Paris, in the sad shadows of this ancient house, these names are very pleasant to me. He lifted her in his arms and strode down through the silent corridors to the stairs. Down 5 flights and into the moonlit corridor, past the little sculptor's den, and then again, in the gates of the north wing, and up the worm-eaten stairs he passed, until he came to a closed door. When he stood knocking for a long time, something moved behind the door. It opened and he went in. The room was dark. As it crossed the threshold, the cat sprung from his arms into the shadows. He listened but heard nothing. The silence was oppressive and he struck a match. At his elbow stood a table, and on the table a candle in a gilded candlestick. This he lighted, then he looked around. The chamber was vast, the hangings heavy with embroidery. Over the fireplace towered a carved mantel gray with the ashes of dead fires. In a recess by the deep-set window stood a bed from which the bedclothes, soft and fine as lace, trailed to the polished floor. He lifted the candle above his head. A handkerchief lay at his face. It was faintly perfumed. He turned toward the windows. In front of them was a canapé, and over it were flung pell-mell a gown of silk, a heap of lace-like garments, white and delicate as spider's meshes, long crumpled gloves, and on the floor beneath, the stockings, the little pointed shoes, and one garter of rosy silk, quaintly flowered and fitting with a silver clasp. Wondering, he stepped up, forwarded, and drew the heavy curtains from the bed. For a moment, the candle flared in his hand. Then his eyes met the other two eyes, wide open, smiling, and the candle flames flashed over hair heavy as gold. She was pale, but not as white as he. Her eyes were untroubled as a child, but he stared, trembling from head to foot while the candle flickered in his hand. At last he whispered, "Sylvia, it is I." Again he said, "It is I." Then, knowing she was dead, he kissed her on the mouth, and through the long watches of the night the cat purred on his knee, tightening and relaxing her padded claws until the sky paled above the street of the four winds. The hell, what kind of book is this, bro? She died. The street of the first shall be a good cheer, and the sullen month will die, and a young moon requite us by and by. Look how the old one, meager, bent, and wan, with age and fast, is fainting from the sky. The street of the first shell. The room was already dark. The high roof opposite cut out what little remained of the December daylight. Hold on. The girl drew her chair nearer the window and choosing a large needle, threaded it, knotting the thread over her fingers. Then she smoothed the baby garment across her knees and bending bit off the thread where the smaller needle, from where it rested in the hem. When she had brushed away the stray threads and bits of lace, she laid it again over her knees caressingly. Then she slipped the threaded needle from her corsage and passed it through a button. As the button spun down the thread, her hand faltered. The thread snapped and the button rolled across the floor. She raised her head. Her eyes were fixed on a strip of waning light above the chimneys. From somewhere in the city came sounds like the distant beating of drums, and beyond, far beyond, a vague muttering now growing, swelling, rumbling in the distance like the pounding of surf upon the rocks, now like the surf again, receding, growling, menacing. The cold had become intense, a bitter, piercing cold which strained and snapped at every joist and beam and turned the slush of yesterday to flint. From the street below, every sound, broken, sharp, and metallic, the clatter of sabots, the rattle of shutters, or the rare sound of a human voice. The air was heavy, weighed with a black cold as with a pall. To breathe was painful, to move an effort. In the desolate sky there was something that wearied, in the brooding clouds, something that saddened. It penetrated the freezing city, cut by the freezing river, the splendid city with its towers and domes, its quays and bridges, and its thousand spires. It entered the squares, it seized the avenues and palaces, stole across bridges, and crept among the narrow streets of the Latin Quarter. Gray, under the gray of the December sky, sadness, utter sadness. A fine icy sleet was falling, powdering the pavement with a tiny crystalline dust. It sifted against the window panes and drifted in heaps along the sill. The light at the window had nearly failed, and the girl bent low over her work. Presently she raised her hand, brushing the curls from her eyes. "Jack, dearest, don't forget to clean your palette," he said. "All right," and picking up the palette, sat down upon the floor in front of the stove. His head and shoulders were in the shadow, but the firelight fell across his knees and glimmered red on the blade of the palette knife. Full in the fireplace beside him stood a colored box. On the lid was carved J. Trent, École de Beaux-Arts, the School of Beauty Arts, 1870. This inscription was ornamented with an American and a French flag. The sleet blew against the window panes, covering them with stars and diamonds. Then, melting from the warmer air within, it ran down and froze again in fern-like traceries. A dog whined and the patter of small paws sounded on the sink behind the stove. "Jack, dear, do you think Hercules is hungry?" The patter of paws was redoubled behind the stove. "He is whining," she continued nervously, "and it isn't because he's hungry, it is because—" Her voice faltered. A low humming filled the air. The windows vibrated. "Oh, Jack," she cried, "another—" But her voice was drowned out in the scream of a shell tearing through the clouds overhead. "That is the nearest yet." "Oh, no," he answered cheerfully. "Probably fell away over by Montmartre." And she did not answer. He said again with exaggerated unconcern, "They wouldn't take away the trouble. They wouldn't take the trouble to fire at the Latin Quarter. Anyway, they haven't found a battery that can hurt it." After a while she spoke up brightly. "Jack, dear, when are you going to take me to see Monsieur West's statues?" "I will bet," he said, throwing down his palette and walking over to the window beside her, "that Colette has been there today." "Why?" she asked, opening her eyes very wide. Then, "Oh, it's too bad. Really, men are tiresome when they think they know everything, and I warn you that if Monsieur West is vain enough to imagine that Colette—" From the north another shell came whistling and quavering through the sky, passing above them with a long-drawn screech that left the windows singing. Oh, I low-key thought they meant shells like seashells, but I think they mean artillery shells. And also, I'm so tired. How do I just read and I get exhausted? Like, does my brain have to just, like, is my brain just has so little energy that it's like reading for half an hour is enough to make me pass out? Like, I'm just totally out of freaking energy, bruh. Alright, let's keep reading. I just had to take a freaking TikTok break. I want to go to bed. Like, oh my god, how do people even stay awake so fucking long? That he blurted out was too near for comfort. They were silent for a while, and then he spoke again gaily. Wow, a lot of homophobia in this book. I'm just kidding. I know it means happy, probably. Go on, Sylvia, and wither poor West, but she only sighed. Oh dear, I can never seem to get used to the shells. He sat down on the arm of the chair beside her. Her scissors fell jingling to the floor. She tossed the unfinished froth rock after them and putting both arms in his neck drew him down into her lap. Don't go out tonight, Jack. He kissed her uplifted face. You know I must. Don't make it hard for me. You know I must. Don't make it hard for me. When I hear the shells, and you know you're out in the city, but they all fall in Montmartre. They may all fall in the Beaux Art, but you said yourself that the two struck the Quai d'Orsay, mere accident. Jack, have pity with me. Take me with you. And who will be there to get dinner? She rose and flung herself on the bed. Oh, I can't get used to it, and I know you must go, but I beg you not to be late to dinner. You knew what I suffer. I cannot help. And you must be patient with me, dear. He said, it is safe there as it is in our own house. She watched him fill for her the alcohol lamp, and when he had lighted it and had taken his hat to go, she jumped up and clung to him in silence. After a moment, he said, now, Sylvia, remember my courage is sustained by yours. Come, I must go. She did not move, and he repeated, I must go. Then she stepped back, and he thought she was going to speak and waited, but she only looked at him, and a little impatiently kissed her again, saying, don't worry, dearest. When he reached the last flight of stairs on his way to the street, a woman hobbled out the housekeeper's lodge, waving a letter and calling Monsieur Jack, Monsieur Jack. This was left by Monsieur Fallowby. He took the letter and, leaning on the threshold of the lodge, read it. Dear Jack, I believe Braith is dead broke, and I'm sure Fallowby is. Braith swears he is, and Fallowby swears he is, so you can draw your own conclusion. Got a scheme for a dinner, and if it works, I will let you fellows in. Yours faithfully, West. P.S. Fallowby is shaken Hartman and his gang. Thank the Lord, there's something rotten there. Or it may be he's only a miser. P.P.S. I'm more desperately in love than ever, but I'm sure she does not care a straw for me. All right, said Trent with a smile to the concierge. How is Papa Cotard? My fucking god. Can't believe today's already Thursday.
Water is Red Bull in it? それだけ取っちゃっていいんだね。よろしく頼むにゃ。じゃあ行くよ。おお。あ、ちょっと吸いただけでこれさすがにこのガン大きい。糖量がすごい取れるね。春と秋は毎年こんなもんにゃ。もうこんなにこれもう一人焼肉で作れるんじゃないそれだけ取っちゃっていいんだね。よろ
Père Cotard, he cried cheerily. How goes the wound today? He walked to the bed and drew the curtains. An old man was laying among the tumbled sheets. Better, smiled Trent. Better, repeated the man warily, and after a pause, have you any news, Monsieur Jack? Haven't been out today. I will bring you any rumor I may hear through goodness knows. Though goodness knows I've heard enough of rumors. He muttered to himself, then aloud, cheer up, you're looking better. And the sortie, the sortie, that's for this week. General Trochu sent orders for last night. It will be terrible. It will be sickening, thought Trent as he went out into the street and turned the corner. Towards the Rue de Seine, slaughter, phew. I'm glad I'm not going. The street was almost deserted. A few women muffled in tattered military capes crept along the frozen pavement, and a wretchedly clad gamin hovered over the sewer hole on the corner of the boulevard. A rope around his waist held his rags together. From the rope hung a rat, still warm and bleeding. There's another in there, he yelled at Trent. I hit him, but he got away. Trent crossed the street and asked, how much? 2 francs for a quarter of a fat one. That's what they give you at the Saint Germain market. Do I have the rat? A violent fit of coughing interrupted him, but he wiped his face with the palm of his hand and looked cunningly at Trent. Last week you could buy a rat for 6 francs, and here he swore vilely. The rats have quit the Rue de Seine and they kill them now over at the new hospital. I'll let you have this for 7 francs. I can sell it for 10 in the Isle of St. Louis. You lie, said Trent, and let me tell you that if you try to swindle anybody in this quarter, the people will make short work of you and your rats. He stood a moment eyeing the gamin, who pretended to snivel, then tossed him a franc, laughing. The child caught it and, thrusting it into his mouth, wheeled about to the sewer hole. For a second he crouched motionless, alert, all eyes on the bars of the drain. Then leaping forward he hurled a stone to the gutter, and Trent left him to finish, a fierce grey rat that writhed, squealing at the mouth of the sewer. Suppose Braith should come to that, he thought, poor little chap, and hurrying he turned in the dirty passage de Beauart and entered the third home to the left. Monsieur's home, quavered the old concierge. Home, a garret absolutely bare, save for the iron bedstead in the corner and the iron basin and pitcher on the floor. West appeared at the door, winking with much mystery, and motioned Trent to enter. Braith, who was painting in bed to keep warm, looked up, laughed, and shook hands. Any news? The perfunctory question was answered as usual by nothing but the cannon. Trent sat down on the bed. Where on earth did you get that? He demanded, pointing to a half-finished chicken nestling in a wash basin. West grinned. Are you millionaires, you two? Out with it. Wraith, looking a little ashamed, began. Oh, it's one of West's exploits, cut short by West, who said he would tell the story himself. You see, before the siege, I had a letter of introduction to a type here. A fat banker, German American variety. You know the species I see. Well, of course, I forgot to present the letter. But this morning, judging it to be a favorable opportunity, I called on him. The villain lives in comfort. Fires, my boy, fires in the anterooms. The Buttons finally condescends to carry my letter and card up, leaving me standing in the hallway, which I did not like. So I entered the first room. I saw and nearly fainted at the sight of a banquet on a table by the fire. Down comes Button, very insolent. No, oh no, his master is not at home, and in fact is too busy to receive letters of introduction by now. The siege and many business difficulties. I deliver my a kick to Buttons, pick up this chicken from the table, toss my card as the empty on the empty plate, and addressing Buttons as a species of Prussian pig, march out with the honors of war. Trent shook his head. I forgot to say that Hardman often dines there, and I draw my own conclusions. Continued west. There, and I've drawn my own conclusions. Continued west. Now about this chicken. Half of it is for Braith and myself, and half for Colette, but of course you'll help me eat my part because I'm not hungry. Neither am I, began Braith, but Trent, with a smile at the pinched faces before him, shook his head, saying, "What nonsense, you know I'm never hungry." West hesitated, reddening, then slicing off Braith's fortune, but not eating any himself, said good night and hurried to the number 470 Rue Serpent, which lived a pretty girl named Colette, orphan after Sedan, and heaven alone knew where she got the roses in her cheeks. For the sage came hard on the poor. The chicken will delight her, but I really believe she's in love with Trent. West, said Trent. Then walking over to the bed, to see here, old man, no dodging, you know. How much have you left? How much you have left? The other hesitated and flushed. Come, old chap, insisted Trent. Braith drew a purse from behind his bolster and handed it to his friends with a simplicity that touched him. 7 sous, he counted. You make me tired. Why on earth don't you come to me? I take it Dale Braith. I take it ill. I don't know what that means. Or he takes it ill, like he's offended. But why is there like the D in there? Maybe it's like a misprint. How many times must I go over the same thing and explain to you that because I have money, it is my duty to share it? And your duty. And your duty, haha. It's my duty to share, and your duty, and the duty of every American to share with me. Can't get a cent. The city's blockaded, and the American ministry has its hands full with the German riffraff and deuce knows what. You act sensibly. I will, Trent, but it's an obligation that perhaps I can never in part repay. I'm poor. And of course you'll pay me. If I were an usurer, I would take your talent for security when you are rich and famous, don't Trent? Alright, no more monkey business. Alright. He slipped a dozen gold pieces into the purse and tucking it again under his mattress, smiled at Braith. How old are you? He demanded. 16. Trent laid his hands lightly on his friend's shoulder. I'm 22. I have the right to a grandfather's. As far as you are concerned, you'll do as I say until you're 21. The siege will be over by then, I hope, said Braith, trying to laugh, but the prayer in his heart, how long, O Lord, how long, was answered by the swift screams of a shell soaring among the storm clouds of that December night. Alright, well, that was interesting. I don't really know what's happening. Alright. And then they all died, right? Is that what happened? West, standing in the doorway of a house in the Rue Serpent, was speaking angrily. He said he didn't care whether Hartman liked it or not. He was telling him, not arguing with him. You call yourself an American, he sneered. Berlin and hell are full of that kind of American. You come loafing about around Colette with your pockets stuffed with white bread and beef and a bottle of wine and 30 francs, and you can't really afford to give $1. American ambulance and public assistant, which Braith does, and he's half starved. Hartman retreated to the curbstone, but West followed him, his face like a thundercloud. Don't you dare call yourself a countryman of mine, he growled. No, not an artist neither. Artists don't worm themselves into services of public defense where they do nothing but feed like rats on the people's food. And I'll tell you now, he continued, dropping his voice, for Hartman had started as though stung. Better keep away from that Alsatian Bressier and the smug-faced thieves who haunt it. You know what they do with suspects. You lie, you hound, screamed Hartman and flung the bottle in his hands straight at West's face. West had him by the throat in a second, forcing him against the dead wall, shook him wickedly. Now you listen to me, he muttered through his clenched teeth. You are already a suspect, and I swear I believe you are a paid spy. It isn't my business to detect such vermin, but I don't intend to denounce you, but understand this. Colette don't like you, and I can't stand you. And if I catch you in the street again, I'll make it somewhat unpleasant. Get out, you sleek Prussian. Hartman had managed to drag a knife from his pocket, but West tore from him and hurled him into the gutter. A gamin who had seen us burst into a peal of laughter, which rattled harshly in the silent street. Then everywhere windows were raised and rows of haggard faces appeared, laughing, demanding to know why people should laugh in the starving city. It is a victory, murmured one. Look at him, look at that, cried West as Hartman picked himself up from the pavement. Look, you miser, look at those faces. But Hartman gave him a look which he never forgot, and walked away without a word. Trent, who suddenly appeared at the corner, glanced cautiously at West, who merely nodded towards his door, saying, Come in, Fallowby's upstairs. What are you doing with that knife? Demanded Fallowby as he and Trent entered the studio. West looked at his wounded hand, which still clutched the knife. I was saying cut myself by accident. Tossed into a corner and washed the blood from his fingers. Fallowby, fat and lazy, watched him without comment, but Trent, half divining how things had turned, walked over to Fallowby, smiling. I've got a bone to pick with you, he said. What is it? I'm hungry, replied Fallowby with affected eagerness. But Trent frowned, telling him to listen. How much did I advance you a week ago? 380 francs, replied the other without a squirm of contrition. Where is it? Fallowby began a series of intricate explanations which were soon cut short by Trent. I know, you blew it in. You always blow it in. I don't care a rap what you did before the siege. I know you are rich and have a right to dispose of your money as you wish to. And I know that generally speaking, it is none of my business, but now it is my business as I have to supply the funds until you get some more, which you want until the siege is ended one way or another. I wish to share what I have, but I won't see it thrown out the window. Oh, yes, of course, I know you'll reimburse me, but that isn't the question. And anyway, it's the opinion of your friends, old man, that you will not be worse off for a little abstinence from fleshly pleasures. You're positively a freak in this famine-cursed city of skeletons. I am rather stout, he admitted. It is true you are out of money, demanded Trent. Yeah, I am. Yes, I am, sighed the other. The roast sucking pig on the rue straight honore isn't there yet, continued Trent. What? Stammered the feeble one. I thought so. I caught you in ecstasy before that sucking pig at least 1,000 times. Then laughing, he presented Fallowby with a roll of 20-franc pieces, saying if you go for luxuries, you must live on your own flesh, and went over to aid West, who sat beside the wash basin binding up his hand. West suffered him to tie the knot, and then said, but you remember yesterday when I left you and Briar to take the chicken to Colette? Chicken, good heavens, moaned Fallowby. Chicken, repeated West, enjoying Fallowby's grief. Aye, that is, I must explain things have changed. Colette and I are to be married. What? What about the chicken? Ground Fallowby. Shut up, laughed Trent. Slipping his arm through West's walked towards the stairway. The poor little thing, said West. Just think. Not a splinter of firewood for a week, and she wouldn't tell me because she thought I needed it for my clay figure. When I heard it, I smashed that smirking clay nymph to pieces, and the rest can freeze and be hanged. And after a moment, he added timidly, won't you call on your way down and say bonsoir? It's number 17. Yes, said Trent, and he went out softly, closing the door behind. He stopped on the third landing, lighted a match, scanned the number on the row of dingy doors, and knocked on at number 17. C'est toi, George? The door opened. Oh, pardon, Monsieur Jack. I thought you were Monsieur West. Alright, now let's hold on.
Shut up that kind of misery to climb when you're nice to me.
have amazing goals like making happy. Is that your happiness? That's your happiness. Enjoy. Love the smell in the summer. He was making happy.
The family had only just moved into their new house, but the little girl kept hearing what sounded like someone behind her calling her over.
Oh, epic deal!
Should we get following him?
Are we sure we're done our thing? I mean, sometimes it feels like we only get to do one fun thing a week.
Sure. Do we really want to put all of our energy and creativity into whatever the hell cloud they're going on? No problem.
Oh, where's the money? Where's the money? No doubt, no doubt.
See? Like that. Do we want to pour that kind of magic into clouds? This shit soup? Never. I'll do it. Me too.
What the hell?
I'm not going to Bitcoin yet. I've been planning a lot of feeds socially, and I just know that as soon as I'm unavailable, everybody's going to want these social butterfly. That's who I'll be. Spread his wings. Should probably get something when I have time for it crazy. See, boss, this is what you got to work with us on the other fails. They're just as it, but none of us are bleeding on you from the outside or the inside. Time to go downstairs to do the laundry. Can't think of anything safer. Wow!
Epic deal!
I'm a dunk in basketball for reals.
Yeah, I got a first one. Yeah, it's so bad, I don't even want to listen to my catchphrase.
What was that about?
Everything! Holmes come out the camera cut to hide how big it was, without catching me on TV. It's over. Thanks a lot, idiot!
Alright. Fuck is happening now? Oh, so thank you so much for your wishes. I'm dying to tell Sylvia, tell her that, and what, laughed Trent. I'm very happy, she sighed. He's pure gold, returned Trent, and then gaily, I want you and George to come and dine with us tonight. It's a little treat. You see, tomorrow is Sylvia's fete. Sylvia's party. She will be 19. Everton to Thorn and the Gurnalex will come with their cousin OD. Fallowby is engaged not to bring anybody but himself. The girl accepted shyly, charging him with loads of loving messages to Sylvia, and then he said goodnight. He started up the street, walking swiftly for it was bitter cold, and cutting across the Rue de la Lune, he entered the Rue de Seine. The early winter night had fallen, almost without warning. Now the sky was clear, and myriads of stars glittered in the heavens like myriad arrows. The bombardment had become furious, a steady rolling thunder from the Prussian cannon punctuated by the heavy shocks from Mount Valérien. The shells screamed across the sky, leaving trails like shooting stars, and now he turned to look back. Rockets blue and red flared above the horizon from the fort of Issy, and the fortress of the north flamed like a bonfire. Good news, a man shouted over the boulevard Saint-Germain. As if by magic, the streets were filled with people, shivering, shattering with sunken eyes. Jack, cried one, the army of the Loire. Monville is come then at last, I told thee, tomorrow, tonight, who knows? Is it true? Is it a sortie? Someone said, oh God, a sortie, and my son, another cried. To the Seine, they said, one can see the signals of the army of the Loire from the Pont Neuf. There's a child standing near Trent who kept repeating, Mama, Mama, then tomorrow we may eat my white bread. And beside him an old man swaying, stumbling, his shriveled hands crushed to his breast, muttering as if it's insane. Could it be true? Who has heard the news? The shoemaker on the Rue de Bussy had it from a mobile who heard a Frank Terror repeated to a captain of the National Guard. Trent followed the throng, surging through the Rue du Seine to the river. Rock after rocket clove the sky, and now from Montmartre, the cannon charged, and the batteries on Montparnasse joined in with a crash. The bridge was packed with people. Trent asked who has seen the signals of the army of the Loire. We are waiting, was the reply. He looked towards the north. Suddenly, the huge silhouette of the Arc de Triomphe sprang into black relief against the flash of a cannon. The boom of the gun rolled along the quay, and the old bridge vibrated. Again, over by the Point du Jour, a flash and heavy explosion shook the bridge, and then the whole eastern bastion of the fortifications blazed and crackled, sending a red flame into the sky. Has anyone seen the signals yet? He asked again. We are waiting, was the reply. Yes, waiting. Murmured a man behind him. Waiting, sick, starved, freezing, but waiting. Is it a sortie? Then go gladly. Is it to starve? Then starve. They have no time to think of surrender. Are they heroes? These Parisians? Answer me, Trent. The American ambulance surgeon turned about and scanned the parapets of the bridge. Any news, doctor? Asked Trank. Mechanically, news, said the doctor. I don't know any. I have no time to know why. I haven't time to know any. What are these people after? They say the army of the Loire has signaled Mount Valérien. Poor devils, the doctor glared about him for an instant, and then I'm so harried and wondered that I don't know what to do. After the last sortie, we had the work of 50 ambulances on our poor little corpse. Tomorrow there's another sortie, and I wish you fellows could come over to headquarters. We may need volunteers. How's Madame? He added abruptly. Well, replied Trent, but she seems to grow more nervous every day. I ought to be with her now. Take care of her, said the doctor. Then with a sharp look at the people, I can't stop now. Good night. And he hurried away, muttering, poor devils. Trent leaned over the parapet and blinked at the black river surging through the arches. Dark objects carried swiftly on the breast of the current struck with a grinding noise against the stone piers, spun for an instant, then hurried away into the darkness. Dark objects carried swiftly on the breast of the current, struck with a grinding, tearing noise against the stone piers, spun around for an instant, and hurried away into the darkness. The ice from the Marne As he stood staring into the water, a hand was laid on his shoulder. "Hello, Southwark," he cried, turning around. "This is a queer place for you." Wow. "Trent, I have something to tell you. Don't stay here, and don't believe in the army of the lore." And the attaché of the American legation slipped his arm through Trent and drove him towards the Louvre. "Then it's another lie," said Trent bitterly. "Worse, we know at the legation. Can't speak of it, but that's not what I have to say. Something happened this afternoon. The Alsatain Brasserie was visited, and an American named Hartman has been arrested. I know a German who calls himself American. His name is Hartman. Well, he was arrested 2 hours ago. They mean to shoot him." "What?" "Of course, we at the legation can't allow him to shoot him offhand, but the evidence seems conclusive. Is he a spy? All the papers seized in his room are pretty damning proofs, and besides, he was caught, they say, swindling the Public Food Committee. He drew rations for 50. How, I don't know. Claims to be an American artist, and we have obliged to take note of it at the legation. It's a nasty affair. To cheat the people at such a time is worse than robbing the poor box," cried Trent angrily. "Let him shoot them. Let them shoot him. He's an American citizen." "Yes, oh yes," said the other with a bitterness. "American citizen is a privilege. Is a precious privilege for every googly-eyed German." His anger choked him. Southwark shook hands with him warmly. "It can't be helped. We must own the carry-on. I'm afraid you may be called to identify him as an American artist," he said with the ghost of a smile on his deep-lined face, and walked away through the Cours la Reine. Trent swore silently for a moment and then drew out his watch. 7 o'clock. Sylvia will be anxious. The crowd still huddled, shivering on the bridge. A somber, pitiful congregation peering out into the night for the signals of the army of the Loire. And their hearts beat time to the pounding of the guns. Their eyes lighted with each flash from the bastions, and hope rose with the drifting rockets. A black cloud hung over the fortifications. From horizon to horizon, the cannon smoke stretched in wavering bands, now capping the spires and domes with clouds, now blowing in steamers and shreds along the street, now descending from the housetops, enveloping quays, bridges, and rivers in the sulphurous mist, the sulphurous desert. From Terraria Calamity Mod. And through the smoke pall the lightning of the cannon played, while from time to time a rift above showed a fathomless black vault set with stars. He turned again into the Rue de Seine, that sad abandoned street with its rows of closed shutters and desolate ranks of unlighted lamps. He was a little nervous and wished once or twice for a revolver, but the slinking forms which passed him in the darkness were too weak with hunger to be dangerous, he thought, and he passed on unmolested to his doorway, but there somebody sprang at his throat. Over and over the icy pavement he rolled with his salient, tearing at the noose about his neck, and with a wrench sprang to his feet. "Get up," he cried to the others. Slowly and with great deliberation, a small gamin picked himself up out of the gutter and surveyed Trent with disgust. "That's a nice clean trick, a whelp of your age. You'll finish against a dead wall. Give me that cord." Urchin handed him the noose without a word. Trent struck a match and looked at the assailant. It was the rat killer of the day before. I thought so. "Tiens, c'est toi," said the gunman tranquilly. The impudence, the overpowering audacity of the ragamuffin took Trent's breath away. "Do you know, you young straggler," he gasped, "that they shoot thieves of your age? The child turned a passionless face to Trent. Shoot then. That was too much, and he turned on his heel and entered the hotel. Groping up the unlighted stairway, at last reached his own landing and felt above her the darkness for the door. From the studio came the sound of voices, West's hearty laugh, and Fallowby's chuckle, and at last he found a knob and, pushing back against the door, stood a moment confused by the light. "Hello, Jack," cried West. "You're a pleasant creature, inviting people to dine and letting them wait. Here's Fallowby weeping with hunger." "Shut up," observed the louder. "Perhaps he's been out to buy a turkey. He's been out garroting. Look at his noose," laughed Gurnalek. So now we know how you get your cash," added West. "Vive le coup de Père Francois." Trent shook hands with everybody and laughed at Sylvia's pale face. "I didn't mean to be late. I stopped on the bridge a moment to watch the bombardment." "Are you anxious, Sylvia?" She smiled and murmured, "Oh no," but her hand dropped into his and tightened convulsively. "To the table," shouted Fallowby, and uttered a joyous whoop. "Take it easy," observed Thorn, with a remnant of manners. "You're not the host, you know." Marie Gurnalek, who had been chatting up with Colette, jumped up and took Thorn's arms, and Monsieur Gurnalek and drew Odil's arm through his. "Who are these people?" Trent, bowing gravely, offered his own arm to Colette. West took in Sylvia, and Fallowby hovered anxiously in the rear. "You march through the table 3 times while singing the Marseillaise," explained Sylvia, "and Monsieur Fallowby pounds on the table and beats time." Fallowby suggested they could sing after dinner, but his protest was drowned in the ringing chorus. "Aux armes fermes vos battalions." Around the room they marched singing marchands. With all their might while Fallowby, with very bad grace, hammered on the table, consoling himself a little with the exercise would increase his appetite. Hercules, the black and tan, fled under the bed, from which retreat he yapped and whined until dragged up by Gurnalek and placed in Odil's lap. "And now," Trent said gravely, when everyone was seated, "listen," and he read the menu. "Beef soup à la siège de Perros. Fish, sardines à la Père Lachaise, white wine, roti, red wine, fresh beef à la sortie, vegetables, canned beans à la chasse equals pot, canned peas, gravelotte, potatoes, Irelandaise, miscellaneous, cold corned beef à la Theors, stewed prunes à la Garibaldi, dessert, dried prunes, white bread, currant jelly, tea, cafe, liquors, pipes and cigarettes." Fallowby applauded fanatically, and Sylvia served the soup. "Isn't it delicious?" sighed Odile. Marie Gurnalek sipped her soup in rapture. "Not at all like horse, and I don't care what they say. Horse doesn't taste like beef," whispered Colette to West. Fallowby, who had finished, began to caress his chin and eye the tureen. "Have some more, old chap?" inquired Trent. "Monsieur Fallowby cannot have any more," announced Sylvia. "I'm saving this for the concierge." Fallowby transferred his eyes from the fish. The sardines, hot from the grill, were a great success, while the others were eating. Sylvia ran downstairs with the soup for the old concierge and her husband, and when she hurried back, flushed and breathless, and had slipped into her chair with a happy smile at Trent, that young man arose, and silence fell over the table. For an instant he looked at Sylvia and thought he had never seen her so beautiful. "You know," he said, "today is my wife's 19th birthday." Yo, pause. A wife and 19th birthday is just unimaginable, but you know what, whatever. Fallowby, bubbling with enthusiasm, waved his glass in circles above his head to the terror of Odile and Colette, his neighbors. And Thorn, West, and Gurnalek refilled their glasses 3 times before the storm of applause with which the toast of Sylvia had provoked subsided. 3 times. The glasses were filled and emptied to Sylvia and again to Trent, who protested. That is irregular, he cried. The next toast is to the twin republics, France and America. To the republics, they cried. And the toast was drunk amid shouts of Vive la France, Vive America. Hold on, my phone case just broke a little bit. Viva la nation. Then Trent, with a smile at Wes, offered the toast to a happy pair, and everybody understood, and Sylvia leaned over and kissed Colette while Trent bowed to Wes. The beef was eaten in comparative calm, but when it was finished and a portion of it set for the old people below, Trent cried, "Drink to Paris." May she rise from the ruins and crush the invaders, and the cheers rung out, drowning for a moment of the monotonous thunder of the Prussian guns. Pipes and cigarettes were lighted, and Trent listened an instant to the animated chatter around him, broken by ripples of laughter from the girls or the mellow chuckle of Fallowby. Then he turned to Wes. "There's going to be a sortie tonight," he said, "and I saw the American ambulance surgeon just before I came in, and he asked me to speak to you fellows. Any aid we can give him will not come amiss." Then, dropping his voice and speaking in English, "As for me, I shall go out with the ambulance tomorrow morning. There is of course no danger, but it's just as well to keep it from Sylvia." West nodded. Thorne and Gerlin-Nalek, who had heard, broke in and offered assistance, but Fallowby volunteered with a groan. "All right," said Trent rapidly. "No more now, but meet me at ambulance headquarters tomorrow morning by 8. Sylvia and Colette, who were becoming uneasy at the conversation in English, now demanded to know what they were talking about. "What does a sculptor usually talk about?" cried West with a laugh. Odile glanced reproachfully at Thorne, her fiancé. "You're not French, you know, and it's none of your business, this war," said Odile with much dignity. Thorne looked meek, but West assumed an air of outraged virtue. "It seems," he said to Fallowby, "that a fellow cannot discuss the beauty of Greek sculptures in his mother tongue without being openly suspected." Colette placed her hand over his mouth and turned to Sylvia, murmured, they are horribly untruthful, these men. I believe the word for ambulance is the same in both languages," said Marie Gurnelek saucily. "Sylvia, don't trust Monsieur Trent." "Jack," whispered Sylvia, "promised me that a knock at the door interrupted her. "Come on in," cried Fallowby, but Trent sprung up, opening the door, looked out, and with a hasty excuse to the rest, stepped into the hallway and closed the door. When he returned, he was grumbling. "What was it, Jack?" cried West. "What is it?" repeated Trent savagely. "I'll tell you what it is. I have received a dispatch from the American minister to go at once and identify and claim as a fellow countryman and brother artist a rascally thief and German spy." "Don't go," suggested Fallowby. "If I don't, they'll shoot him at once." "Let them," growled Thorne. "You fellows know who he is?" "Hartman," shouted West, inspired. Sylvia sprang up deathly white, but Odile slipped her arm around her and supported her to a chair, saying calmly, "Sylvia had fainted. It's the hot room. Bring some water." Trent brought it at once. Sylvia opened her eyes, and after a moment rose and, supported by Marie Gurnelek and Trent, passed into the bedroom. It was the signal for breaking up, and everybody came and shook hands with Trent, saying they hoped Sylvia would sleep it off and that it would be nothing. When Marie Gurnelek took leave of him, she avoided his eyes, but he spoke to her cordially and thanked her for her aid. "Anything I can do, Jack?" inquired West, lingering, and then hurried downstairs to catch up with the rest. Trent leaned over the banisters, listening to their footsteps and chatter. Then the lower door banged and the house was silent. He lingered, staring down into the blackness, biting his lips. Then with an impatient movement, "I'm crazy," he muttered. After lighting a candle, went into the bedroom. Sylvia was laying on the bed and bent over her, smoothing the curly hair on her forehead. "Are you better, dear Sylvia?" "Is this the Sylvia who died at the last chapter?" That's okay. Yeah, have another TikTok break. Mm. Mm. Mm.
The viral crumble Labubu Ube dot cake Dubai chocolate matcha for
When you go from being the oldest
Butter.
Pretty nice girl.
A black basketball star wakes up and finds the woman in his bed.
Today. I suppose you wanted to say, me love you long time.
Yes, very much so.
They always do.
You go sit on the couch and watch TV. I'll deal with you later. And don't bug us.
Your breath stinks. You stink like an old man.
Yeah, okay. Hello, you're still here?
Duh.
Nice to meet you. Hey, are you eating food out of my fridge?
Well, yeah, I gotta eat my face.
Okay, look, you were here for 2 weeks. Now it's time to get on the road.
Maybe a protein sandwich.
Oh, yeah, that's not getting old. I am not your grandfather. Get out of my house.
I found a stupid photo album. Who just something in something picture?
I don't know. Some annoying brat was living with me. That picture was taken like 30 years ago. And you know what? Nothing's changed. There was an annoying brat living with me then, and there's an annoying brat living with me now.
There's my sandwich.
I'm not making you a sandwich. All my life, you do a good job on me. Every girl ever had sex with a stolen cash in my wallet. Yeah, I can't remember putting it in a different drawer. I worked at a job I hate, make money for other people, and nobody ever gives me anything.
I suppose you want to say, me love you long time.
Yes, very much so.
I feel so happy today. It's too bad I have crippling depression. I feel so happy.
I don't understand our relationship. Sometimes we're friends, sometimes we're more, and sometimes I'm just a stranger to you. One minute you treat me like I'm special, and the next you act like I don't matter. One day you give me lots of attention, and the next day you ignore me.
See this right here? Can't get it in. Here's how you do it. Put your nail gun. And nails, load it in. Make sure there's a lot of nails. Then grab it like this. Put the nail like this. Put it in place like that. Make sure it's right and marked. And then, cool, that's all you got. That's one.
In the future, supermarkets sell babies as
Alright. Fuck is happening? Okay. Just make it so that in the fucking book already. She did not answer, but she raised her eyes to his. For an instant, she met her gaze. But what he read there sent a chill to his heart, and he sat down, covering his face with his hands. At last, she spoke in a voice changed and strained, a voice where she had never heard, and he dropped in his hands and listened, bolt upright in his chair. Jack, it has come at last. I feared it and trembled. Ah, how often I have lain awake at night with this on my heart and pray that I might die before you should ever know of it, for I love you, Jack, and if you go away I cannot live. I have deceived you. Happened before I knew you, but since the first day you found me weeping in the Luxembourg and spoke to me, Jack, I've been faithful to you in every thought and deed. I loved you from the first, and I dare not tell you this, fearing that you would go away, and since my love has grown, and oh, I suffered. But I dared not tell you, and now you know, but you do not know the worst for him. Or for him, now what do I care? He was cruel, oh so cruel. Must I go on? Must I tell you? Can you not imagine it? Or did she cheat on him or something? What the fuck is going on? Must I tell you, can you not imagine? He did not stir, his eyes seemed dead. I was so young, I knew nothing, and he said that he loved me. Brooke rose and struck the candles with his clenched fist, and the room was dark. The bells of St. Sulpice told the hour, and she started up, speaking with feverish haste. I must finish when you told me you loved me. You asked me nothing, but even then, it was too late, and that other life which binds me to him must stand forever between you and me. For there is another whom he has claimed and is good to. He must not die, they cannot shoot him for the other's sake. Prince sat motionless, but his thoughts ran on an interminable whirl. Sylvia, little Sylvia, who shared with him her student life, who bore him with the dreary desolation of the siege without complaint, this slender, blue-eyed girl whom he was so quietly fond of whom he teased or caressed as the whim suited, who sometimes made him the least bit impatient with her passionate devotion to him. Could this be the same Sylvia who lay weeping there in the darkness? Then he clenched his teeth. Let him die. But then, for Sylvia's sake and for that other's sake, yes, he must go. His duty was plain before him, but Sylvia, he could not be what he had been to her, and yet a vague terror seized him. Now all was said. Trembling, he struck a light. She lay there, her curly hair, tumbling to her face, her small white head pressed to her breast. He could not leave her. He could not stay. He never knew before he loved her. She'd been a mere comrade, this girl, wife of his. He loved her now with all his heart and soul, and he knew it only when it was too late. Too late, why? Then he thought of that other one binding her, linking her forever to the creature who stood in danger of his life. With an oath he sprang to the door, but the door would not open. Or it was that he pressed it back, locked it, and flung himself on his knees beside the bed, knowing that he dared not, for his life's sake, leave what was his all in life. In part 3. Fuck, I took a break. I already took like multiple breaks, but god fucking damn. This is like a lot less interesting than I was hoping. Or it was interesting at first, and now it's just getting kind of boring. Like, I don't even know what's happening anymore. Boring. Imagine you're giving me head and I'd swing my head up and say boring. Boring. This book's fucking boring. I have a TikTok break. I've been scrolling TikTok like this whole fucking time, bruh. No, that's not true. I was on Reddit looking at porn. No. Okay. Open this shit. Let's Alright, whatever. Back to reading. Ah. It was 4 in the morning when he came out of the prison of the condemned with the secretary of the American legation. A knot of people had gathered around the American minister's carriage, which stood in front of the prison, the horses stamping and pawing in the icy street. The coachman huddled on the box, wrapped in furs. Southwark helped the secretary into the carriage and shook hands with Trent, thanking him for coming. How the scoundrel did stare, he said. Your evidence was worse than a kick. Oh yeah, it is. When he wrote that one time. Your evidence was worse than a kick, but it saved his skin for the moment at least and prevented complications. The secretary sighed. We have done our part. Now let them prove to him a spy and wash our hands with him. Jump in, Captain. Come along, Trent. I have a word to say to Captain Southwark. I won't detain him, said Trent hastily, and dropping his voice. Southwark, help me now. You know the story from the Blackguard. You know the child is at his rooms. Get it and take it to my own apartment. And if he's shot, I will provide a home for it. I understand, said the captain gravely. Will you do this at once? At once, he replied. Their hands met in a warm clasp, and then Captain Southwark climbed into the carriage, motioning Trent to follow, but he shook his head saying goodbye, and the carriage rolled away. He watched the carriage to the end of the street, then started toward his own quarter, but after a step or two hesitated, stopped, and finally turned away in the opposite direction. Something, perhaps it was the sight of the prisoner he had so recently confronted, nauseated him. He felt the need of solitude and quiet to collect his thoughts. The events of the evening had shaken him terribly, but he would walk it off, forget, bury everything, and then go back to Sylvia. He started on swiftly, and for a time the bitter thoughts seemed to fade. But when he paused at last, breathless under the Arc de Triomphe, the bitterness and the wretchedness of the whole thing, yes, of his whole misspent life, came back with a pang. Then the face of the prisoner, stamped in the horrible grimace of fear, grew in the shadow before his eyes. Sick at heart, he wandered up and down under the great arc, striving to occupy his mind, peering up at the sculptured cornices to read the names of the heroes and battles which he knew were engraved there, but always the ashen face of Hartman followed him, gritting with terror. Or was it terror? Was it not triumph? At the thought he leapt like a man who feels a knife at his throat, but after a savage tramp around the square, came back again and sat down to battle with his misery. The air was cold, but his cheeks were burning with angry shame. Shame, why? Was it because he had married a girl whom chance was made a mother? This is the guy who his girlfriend cheated on her or something like that. And it looks like she has a kid or whatever, a secret child or something. It's pretty horrible. Did he love her? Was this miserable bohemian existence then his end and aim in life? He turned his eyes upon the secrets of his heart and read an evil story, the story of the past, and he covered his face for shame while keeping time to the dull pain throbbing in his head. His heart beat out the story for the future, shame and disgust. Roused at last from a lethargy which had begun to numb the bitterness of his thoughts, he raised his head and looked about. A sudden fog had settled in the street. The arches of the arc were choked with it. He would go home. A great horror of being alone seized him, but he was not alone. The fog was peopled with phantoms. All around him, in the mist, they moved, drifting through the arches in lengthening lines and vanished, while from the fog others rose up, swept past and were engulfed. He was not alone, for even at his side they crowded, touched him, swarmed before him, beside him, behind him, pressed him back, seized and bore him with them through the mist, down a dim avenue, through lanes and alleys white with fog they moved, and if they spoke their voices were dull as the vapor which shrouded them. At last in front, a bank of masonry and earth cut by a massive iron-barred gate, towered up in the fog. Slowly and more slowly they glided, shoulder to shoulder, and thigh to thigh, then all movement ceased. A sudden breeze stirred the fog. It wavered and eddied. Objects became more distinct. A pallor crept above the horizon, touching the edges of the watery clouds, and drew dull sparks from a thousand bayonets. Bayonets, they were everywhere, cleaving the fog or flowing beneath it in rivers of steel. High on the wall of masonry and earth, a great gun loomed, and around it figures moved in silhouettes. Below, a broad torrent of bayonets swept through the earth, through the iron-barred gateway, out into the shadowy plain. It became lighter. Faces grew more distinct among the marching mass, and he recognized one. You, Felipe. The figure turned his head. Trent cried, "Is there room for me?" But the other one waved his arms in a vague adieu. It was gone with the rest. Presently, the cavalry began to pass, squadron on squadron, crowding out into the darkness. Then many cannon, then an ambulance, then again the endless line of bayonets. Beside him, Cuirassier sat on his steaming horse, and in front, among a group of mounted officers, he saw a general, with the astrakhan collar of his dolman turned up about his bloodless face. Some women were weeping near him, and one was struggling to force a loaf of black bread into a soldier's haversack. The soldier tried to aid her, but the sack was fastened, and his rifle bothered him, so Trent held it while the woman unbuttoned the sack and forced in the bread, now wet with her tears. The rifle was not heavy. Trent found it wonderfully manageable. Was the bayonet sharp? He tried it and decided. Then a sudden longing, a fierce, imperative desire took possession with him. Chouette cried at Gamin, clinging to the barred gate on Courtois Monville. Now speak French. Look it up. Trent looked up, and the rat killer laughed in his face. When the soldier had taken to the rifle again, and thanking him, ran hard to catch his battalion. He plunged into the throng about the gateway. "Are you going?" he cried to a Marine who sat in a gutter bandaging his foot. Oh shit, what'd I just do? Oh, okay. Yes, then a girl, a mere child, caught him by the hand and led him into the cafe which faced the gate. The room was crowded with soldiers. Some white and silent, sitting on the floor, others groaning on as the leather-covered settees. The air was sour and suffocating. "Choose," said the girl with a little gesture of pity. "They can't go." In a heap of clothing on the floor, he found a capote and kepi. She helped him buckle his knapsack, cartridge box, and belt, and showed him how to load the chassepot rifle, holding it on her knees. When he thanked her, she started to her feet. "You're a foreigner, American," he said, moving towards the door, but the child barred his way. "I'm a Breton. My father is up there with the cannon of a Marine. He will shoot you if you're a spy." They faced each other for a moment, then sighing, he bent over and kissed the child. Pause. "Pray for France, little one," he murmured, and she repeated with a pale smile, "For France and you, Beaumonsieur." He ran across the street through the gateway. Once outside, he edged into line and shouldered his way along the road. A corporal paused, looked at him, repassed, and finally called an officer. You belong to the 60th. growled the corporal, looking at the number on his kepi. We have no use for franc tireurs, added the officer, clutching sight of his black trousers, edged. I wish to volunteer in place of a comrade, said Trent, and the officer shrugged his shoulders and passed on. Nobody paid much attention to him, one or two, merely glancing at his trousers. The road was deep with slush and mud, plowed and torn by wheels and hoofs. A soldier in front of him wrenched his foot in an icy rut and dragged himself to the edge of the embankment, groaning. The plain on either side of them was gray with melted snow. Here and there, behind hedgerows, stood wagons bearing white flags with red crosses. Sometimes the driver was a priest in rusty hat and gown, sometimes a crippled mobile. Once they passed a wagon driven by a sister of charity, silent empty houses with great rents in their walls, and every window blank. Huddled along the road, further on within the zone of danger, nothing of human habitation remained except here and there a pile of frozen bricks or a blackened cellar choked with snow. For some time Trent had been annoyed by the man behind him who kept treading on his heels. Convinced at last that it was intentional, he turned to remonstrate and found himself face to face with a fellow student from the Beaux Arts. Trent stared. I thought you were in the hospital. The other shook his head, pointing to his bandaged jaw. I see you can't speak. Can I do anything? The wounded man rummaged in his haversack and produced a crust of black bread. Can't eat it. His jaw smashed, and he wants you to chew it for him, said the soldiers next to him. Gross. Trent took the crust and, grinding it in his teeth, morsel by morsel, passed it back to the starving man. From time to time, mounted orderlies sped to the front, covering them with slush. It was a chilly, silent march through sodden meadows wreathed in fog. Along the railroad embankment, along the ditch, another column moved parallel to their own. Trent watched it, a somber mass, now distinct, now vague, had blotted out in a puff of fog. Once for half an hour he lost it, but when again it came into view, he noticed a thin line detaching itself from the flank and, bellying in the middle, swing rapidly to the west. At the same time, a prolonged crackling broke out in the fog in front. Other lines began to slow off from the column, swinging east and west, and the crackling became continuous. A battery passed at full gallop, and he drew back with his comrades to give it way. It went into action a little to the right of his battalion, and as the shot from the first rifled piece boomed through the mist, the cannon for the fortifications opened with a mighty roar. An officer galloped by, shouting something which Trent did not catch, but he saw the ranks in the front suddenly part company with his own and disappear in the twilight. More officers rode up and stood beside him, peering into the fog. Away in front, the crackling had become one prolonged crash. It was dreary waiting. Trent chewed some bread for the man behind, who tried to swallow it, and after a while shook his head, motioning Trent to eat the rest himself. A corporal offered him a little brandy, and he drank it, but when he turned around to return the flask, the corporal was lying on the ground. Alarmed, he looked at the soldier next to him, who shrugged his mouth and opened his mouth to speak. But something struck him, and he rolled over and over into the ditch below. At the moment, the horse of one of the officers gave a bound and backed into the battalion, lashing out with his heels. One man was ridden down, another was kicked in the chest and hurled through the ranks. The officer sank his spurs into the horse and forced him to the front again, where he stood trembling. The cannonade seemed to draw nearer. A staff officer, riding slowly up and down the battalion, suddenly collapsed in his saddle and clung to his horse's mane. One of his boots dangled, crimson and dripping from the stirrup. Then out of the mist in front, men came running. The roads, the fields, the ditches were full of them, and many of them fell. For an instant he imagined he saw horsemen riding about like ghosts in the vapor below, and a man behind him cursed horribly, declaring he too had seen them and that they were Uhlans. But the battalion stood inactive, and the mist fell again over the meadows. The colonel sat heavily upon his horse, his bullet-shaped head buried in the astrakhan collar of his dolman, his fat legs sticking straight out in the stirrups. The burglars clustered about him with bugles poised, and behind him a staff officer in a pale blue jacket smoked a cigarette and chatted with a captain of hussars. From the road in front came the sound of furious galloping, and an orderly reined up beside the colonel, who motioned him to the rear without turning his head. Then, on the left, a confused murmur arose, which ended in a shout. A hussar passed like the wind, followed by another and another, and then squadron after squadron whirled by them into the sheeted mists. At the instant, the colonel reared in his saddle. The bugles clanged, and the whole battalion scrambled down the embankment, over the ditch, and started across the soggy meadow. Almost at once, Trent lost his cap. Something snatched it from his head. He thought it was a tree branch. A good many of his comrades rolled over in the slush and ice, and he imagined that they had slipped. One pitched right across the path, and he stopped to help him up. But the man screamed when he touched him, and an officer shouted, "Forward, forward!" So he ran on again. It was a long jog through the mist, and he was often obliged to shift his rifle. When at last they lay panting behind the railroad embankment, he looked about him. He had felt the need of action, of a desperate physical struggle, of killing and crushing. He had been seized with a desire to fling himself among masses and tear right and left. He longed to fire, to use the thin, sharp bayonet on his chassepot. He had not expected this. He wished to become exhausted, to struggle and cut until incapable of lifting his arm. Then he had intended to go home. He heard a man say that half the battalion had gone down in the charge. And he saw another examining a corpse under the embankment. The body, still warm, was cloaked in a strange uniform. But even when he noticed the spiked helmet lying a few inches away, he did not recognize what had happened. The colonel sat on his horse a few feet to the left, his eyes sparkling under the crimson kepi. Trent heard him reply to an officer, "I can hold it, but another charge and I won't have enough men left to sound a bugle." "Are the Prussians here?" Trent asked of a soldier who sat wiping the blood trickling from his hair. "Yes, the hussars cleaned them out. We caught in the crossfire." "We are supporting a battery on the embankment," said another. Then the battalion crawled over the embankment and moved along the lines of twisted rails. Trent rolled up his trousers and tucked them into his woolen socks. Then he halted again, and some of the men sat down on the dismantled railroad tracks. Trent looked for his wounded comrade from the bow arts. He was standing in his place, very pale. The cannonade had become terrific. For a moment the mist lifted. He caught a glimpse of the 1st Battalion, motionless on the railroad track in front, of regiments on either flank, and then, as the fog settled again, the drums beat and the music of the bugles began away on the extreme left. A restless movement passed among the troops. The colonel threw up his arms and the drums rolled, and the battalion moved off through the fog. They were near the front row, for the 1st Battalion was firing as it advanced. Ambulances galloped along the base of the embankment to the rear, and the hussars passed and were pressed like phantoms. They were in the front at last, for all about them was movement and turmoil. While from the fog close at hand came cries and groans and crashing volleys. Shells fell everywhere, bursting along the embankment, splashing them with frozen slush. Trent was frightened. He began to dread the unknown, which lay there crackling and flaming in obscurity. The shock of the cannon sickened him. He could even see the fog light up with a dull orange as the thunder shook the earth. It was near, he felt certain, for the colonel shouted forward, and the 1st Battalion was hastened into it. He felt his breath, he trembled, but hurried on. A fearful discharge in front terrified him. Somewhere in the fog, men were cheering, and the colonel's horse, streaming with blood, plunged about in the smoke. Another blast and shock right in his face almost stunned him. Then he faltered. All the men to the right were down. His head swam. The fog and smoke stupefied him. He put out his right hand for a support and caught something. It was the wheel of a gun carriage, and the man sprang from below it, aiming a blow at his head with a rammer, but stumbled back, shrieking with a bayonet through his neck, and Trent knew that he had killed. Mechanically, he stooped to pick up his rifle, but the bayonet was still in the man who lay, beating with red hands against the sod. It sickened him, and he leaned on the cannon. Men were firing all around him now, and the air was foul with smoke and sweat. Somebody seized him from behind and another in front. Others in turn seized them or struck them solid blows. The click, click, click of bayonets infuriated him, and he grasped the rammer and struck out blindly until it was shivered to pieces. The man threw his arm around his neck and bore him to the ground, but he throttled him and raised himself to his knees, on his knees. He saw a comrade seize the cannon and fall across it with his skull crushed in. He saw the colonel tumble out of the saddle into the mud, then consciousness fled. When he came to himself, he was lying on the embankment among the twisted rails. On every side huddled men who cried out and cursed and fled away into the fog. And he staggered to his feet and followed them. Once he stopped to help a comrade with a bandaged jaw who could not speak, but clung to his arm for a time and then fell dead in the freezing mire. And again he added another who groaned. Trent set him off a leap, until a sudden volley in the mist relieved him of his charges. An icy wind swept down from the instant, cutting the fog into shreds. For an instant, with an evil leer, the sun peeked through the naked woods of Vincennes, sank like a blood clot in the battery smoke. Lower, lower into the blood-soaked plain. Oh man, part 4. Alright, hold on. Alright, so they went to war and a bunch of them died or something. When midnight sounded from the belfry of Saint Sulpice, the gates of Paris were still choked with fragments of what had once been an army. They entered with the night, a sullen horde, splattered with slime, faint with hunger and exhaustion. There was little disorder at first, and the throng at the gates parted silently as the troops tramped along the freezing streets. Confusion came as the hours passed, swiftly and more swiftly. Crowded squadron after squadron and battery on battery, horses plunging and caissons jolting. The remnants from the front surged through the gates, a chaos of cavalry and artillery struggling for the right of way. Close upon them stumbled the infantry, here a soldier of a regiment marching with a desperate attempt at order. There, a riotous mob of mobiles crushing their way to the streets, then a turmoil of horsemen, cannons, troops without officers, officers without men, and then a line of ambulances, the wheels groaning under their heavy loads. Dumb with misery, the crowd looked on. All through the day, ambulances had been arriving, and all day long the ragged throng whimpered and shivered by the barriers. At noon, the crowd was increased tenfold, filling the squares about the gates and swarming over the inner fortifications. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the German batteries suddenly wreathed themselves in smoke, and the shells fell fast on Montparnasse at 20 minutes after four, two projectiles struck a horse in the Rue du Bac, and a moment later the first shell fell in the Hmm. Oh, where was I? First shell fell in the Latin Quarter. Braith was painting in bed when West came in very much scared. I wish you would come down. Our house has been knocked into a cocked hat, and I'm afraid that some of the pillagers may take it into their heads to pay us a visit. Braith jumped out of bed and bundled himself into a garment which had once been an overcoat. Anybody hurt? He inquired. Struggling with a sleeve full of dilapidated lining. No, Colette is barricaded in the cellar and the concierge ran away to the fortifications. There will be a rough gang there if the bombardment keeps up. You must help us. Of course, said Braith. But it was not until they had reached the Rue Serpent and had turned in the passage which led to West's cellar that the latter cried, Have you seen Jack Trent today? No, replied Braith, looking troubled. He was not at ambulance headquarters. He stayed to take care of Sylvia, I suppose. A bomb came crashing through the roof of a house at the end of the alley and burst in the basement, showering the street with slate and plaster. A second struck a chimney and plunged into the garden, followed by an avalanche of bricks. Another exploded with a deafening report in the next street. They hurried along the passage to the steps which led to the cellar. Here again, Bryeth stopped. Don't you think I had better run up to see if Jack and Sylvia are well entrenched? I can get back before dark. No, go in and find Colette and I'll go. No, let me go and there's no danger. I know it, replied West calmly, and dragging Braith into the alley pointed to the cellar steps. The iron door was barred. Colette, he called. The door swung inward and the girl sprang up the steps to meet them. At the instant, Braith, glancing behind him, gave a startled cry, and pushing the two before him into the cellar, jumped down after them and slammed the iron door. A few seconds later, a heavy jar from the outside shook the hinges. They are here, muttered West, very pale. That door, observed Colette, will hold forever. Braith examined the low iron structure, now trembling with the blows rained on it from without. West glanced anxiously at Colette, who displayed no agitation, and this comforted him. I don't believe they will spend much time here, said Braith. They only rummage in cellars for spirits, I imagine, unless they hear that valuables are buried here. But surely nothing is buried here, examined Braith uneasily. Unfortunately there is, growled West, that miserly landlord of mine. A crash from outside followed by a yell. Cut him short. Then blow after blow shook the doors until there came a sharp snap, the clinking of metal, and a triangular bit of iron fell inwards, leaving a hole through which struggled a ray of light. Instantly West knew, and shoving his revolver through the aperture, fired every cartridge. For a moment the alley resounded with the racket of the revolver, then absolute silence followed. Presently a single questioning blow fell upon the door, and a moment later, and another, then a sudden crack zigzagged across the iron plate. Here, said West, seizing Colette by the wrist, you follow me, Braith. And he ran swiftly towards a circular spot of light at the further end of the cellar. The spot of light came from a barred manhole above. West motioned Braith to mount on his shoulders. Push it over, you must. With little effort, Braith lifted the barred cupboard, scrambled out on his own stomach, and easily raised Colette from West's shoulders. Quick, old chap, cried the latter. Braith twisted down his legs across a fence chain and leaned down again. The cellars were flooded with a yellow light, and the air reeked with the stench of petroleum torches. The iron door still held, but a whole plate of metal was gone. And now, as they looked, a figure came creeping through, holding a torch. Quick, whispered Braith, jump! And West hung dangling until Colette grasped him by the collars and he was dragged out. Then her nerves gave way and she wept hysterically. But West threw his arms around her and led her across the gardens into the next street, where Braith, replacing the manhole cover and piling some stone slabs from the wall over it, rejoined them. It was almost dark. They hurried through the street, now only lightened by burning buildings or the swift glare of the shells. They gave wide berth to the fire, but at a distance saw the flitting forms of pillagers among the debris. Sometimes they passed a female fury, crazed with drink, shrieking anathemas upon the world, or some slouching lout whose blackened face and hands betrayed his share in the work of destruction. At last they reached the Seine and passed the bridge. And then Braith said, I must go back. I am not sure of Jack and Sylvia. As he spoke, he made way for a crowd which came trampling across the bridge and along the river wall by the Dorsey barracks. In the midst of it, West caught the measured tread of a platoon. A lantern passed, a file of bayonets, and another lantern which glimmered on a deathly face behind. Akala gasped, "Hartman," and he was gone. They peered fearfully across the embankment, holding their breath. There was a shuffle of feet on the quay, and the gate of the barracks slammed. A lantern shone for a moment at the postern. The crowd pressed itself to the grill, and then came the clang of the victory from the stone parade. One by one, the petroleum torches flared up along the embankment, and now the whole square was in motion. Down from the Champs-Élysées and across the Place de la Concorde struggled the fragments of the battle, a company here and a mob there. They poured in from every street, followed by women and children. The great murmur, borne on the icy wind, swept through the Arc de Triomphe and down the dark avenue. Perdis. A ragged end of a battalion was pressing past. The spectre of annihilation, West groaned. And then a figure sprang from the shadowy rank and called West's name. And when he saw it was Trent that called out, he cried out. Trent seized him, white with terror. "Sylvia?" West stared speechless, but Colette moaned, "Oh, Sylvia, Sylvia," and they are shelling the quarter. Trent shouted Brea, but he was gone, and they could not overtake him. The bombardment ceased as Trent crossed the St. Boulevard Saint-Germain, but the entrance to the Rue de Seine was blocked by a heap of smoking bricks. Everywhere the shells had torn great holes in the pavement. The cafe was a wreck of splinters and glass. The bookstore tottered, ripping from roof to basement, and the little bakery, long since closed, bulged outwards above a mass of slate and tin. He climbed over the steaming bricks and hurried into the Rue de Tournon. On the corner, a fire blazed, lighting up his own street, and on the blank wall, beneath a shattered glass lamp, a child was writing with a bit of cinder. Here fell the first shell. The letter stared him in the face. The rat killer finished and stepped back to view his work, but catching sight of Trent's bayonet, screamed and fled. Staggered across the shattered street from holes and crannies, In the ruins, fierce women fled from their work of pillage, cursing him. At first he could not find his house, for the tears blinded him. But he felt along the wall and reached the door. A lantern burned in the concierge's lounge, and the old man lay dead beside it. Faint with fright, he leaned on a moment on his rifle, snatching the lantern, sprang up the stairs. He tried to call, but his tongue hardly moved. On the second floor, he saw plaster on the stairs, and on the third, the floor was torn, and the concierge lay in a pool of blood across landing. The next floor was theirs. The door hung from its hinges, and the walls gaped. He crept in and sank down by the bed, and the two arms were flung around his neck. And a tear-stained face saw his own. Sylvia, oh Jack, Jack, Jack. From the tumbled pillow beside them, a child wailed. They brought it. "It is mine," she sobbed. "Ours," he whispered, with his arms around them both. And from the stairs below came Breath's anxious voice. "Trent, is all well?" So that was the girl's baby that she had with another guy, but I guess he's like the stepfather who stepped up or whatever. And next chapter, the street of Our Lady of the Fields, et tu le jour passé dans la tristesse, nous sans comptes comme des jours heureux. The days pass in tears. We are something, the days and the hours, or whatever. Also, hold on. All right. The street of Our Lady of the Fields. The street is not fashionable, neither is it shabby. It is a pariah among streets, a street without a quarter. It is generally understood to lie outside the pale of the aristocratic Avenue de l'Observatoire. The students of the Montparnasse quarter consider it swell and will have none of it. The Latin quarter from the Luxembourg, its northern frontier, sneers at its respectability and regards with disfavor the correctly costumed students who haunt it. Few students go into it. At times, however, the Latin Quarter students use as a thoroughfare between the Rue de Rennes and the Bullier. But except for that and the weekly afternoon visits of parents and guardians to the convent near the Rue Vavin, or the street of Our Lady of the Fields, is as quiet as a Passy boulevard. Perhaps the most respectable portion lies between the Rue de la Grande Chaumière and the Rue Vavin. At least this was the conclusion arrived at by the Reverend Joel Byram, as he rambled through it with Hastings in charge. To Hastings the street looked pleasant in the bright June weather, and he begun to hope for its selection when the Reverend Byram shied violently at the cross of the convent opposite. Jesuits, he muttered. Well, said Hastings warily, I imagine you won't find anything better. You say yourself that vice is triumphant in Paris. And it seems to me that in every street we find Jesuits or something worse. After a moment he repeated, or something worse, which of course I would not notice except for your kindness in warning me. Dr. Byram sucked in his lips and looked about him. He was impressed by the evident respectability of the surroundings. Then, frowning at the convent, he took Hastings' arms and shuffled across the street to an iron gateway which bore the number 201. His painted in white, there is a 201 bis, painted in white on a blue ground. Below there was a note printed in English. For porters, please press once. For servant, please press twice. For parlor, please press thrice. Hastings touched the electric button 3 times, and they were ushered through the garden and into the parlor by a trim maid. The dining room door just beyond was open, and from the table in plain view, a stout woman hastily arose and came toward them. Hastings caught a glimpse of a young man with a big head and several snuffy old gentlemen at breakfast. For the door closed and the stout woman waddled into the room, bringing with her an aroma of coffee and a black poodle. "It is a pleasure to you receive," she cried. "Monsieur is English, no American, of course. My pension is it is for Americans cert out. Here we all speak English. C'est dire, the personnel, the servants do speak plus au moins. A little. I'm happy to have you comme personaires. Madame, began Dr. Byron. Well, it was cut short again. "Ah, yes, I know. Ah, mon Dieu, you do not speak French, but you have come to learn. My husband does speak French, this the personaires. We have at the moment a family American who learn of my husband French." Here the poodle growled at Dr. Byron and was promptly cuffed by his mistress. "Victu," she cried with a slap. "Victu, oh le vilain, mais madame," said Hastings, smiling. "Il n'a pas l'air très féroce. It's not ferocious." The poodle fled, and his mistress cried, "Ah, the accent charming. He does speak already French like a Parisian young gentleman." Then Dr. Byron managed to get in a word or two and gathered more or less information in regards to prices. "It is my pension, Syria. My clientele is of the best. Indeed, a pension de famille, where one is as home. Then they went upstairs to examine Hastings' future quarters, test the bed springs, and arrange for the weekly towel allowance. Dr. Byram appeared satisfied. Madame Marat accompanied them to the door and rang for the maid, but as Hastings walked out and into the gravel walk, his guide and mentor paused with a moment and fixed Madame with his watery eyes. "You understand," he said. Uh-oh. "That he is a youth of most careful bringing up, and his character and morals are without a stain. He is young and has never been aboard. Never even seen a large city, and his parents may have requested me as an old family friend living in Paris to see that he is placed under good influences. He is to study art, but on no account would his parents wish him to live in the Latin Quarter if he knew of the immorality which is rife there." A sound of the click of a latch interrupted him, and he raised his eyes, but not in time to see the maid slap the big-headed young man behind the parlor door. Madame coughed, cast a deadly glance behind her, and then beamed on Dr. Byram. "It is well that he come here. The pension more serious il n'en existe pas. It is not any," she announced with conviction. So, as there was nothing more to add, Dr. Byram joined Hastings at the gate. "I trust," he said, eyeing the Covenant, "that you will make no acquaintance among Jesuits." Hastings looked at the convent until a pretty girl passed before the grey facade, and then he looked at her. A young fellow with a paint box and canvas came swinging along, stopped before the pretty girl, said something during a brief and vigorous handshake, at which they both laughed. And he went his way calling back, "Ah, Damaine Valentine," and at the same breath she cried, "Ah, Damaine Valentine." Valentine, thought Hastings, what a quaint name. As he started to follow the Reverend Joel Byram, who was shuffling towards the nearest tramway station. Okay. All right. Oh, is that A? And you are pleased with Paris, Monsieur Estang, demanded Madame Marat. The next morning, as Hastings came into the breakfast room of the pension, rosy from his plunge in the limited bath above, I'm sure I shall like it, he replied, wondering at his own depression of spirits. The maid brought him coffee and rolls. He returned the vacant glance of the big-headed young man and acknowledged diffidently the salutes of the snuffy old gentleman. He did not try to finish his coffee and sat crunching a roll, unconscious of the sympathetic glances of Madame Marat, who had tact enough not to bother him. Presently a maid entered with a tray on which was balanced 2 bowls of chocolate. The snuffy old gentleman leered at her ankles. The maid deposited the chocolate at a table near the window and smiled at Hastings. Then a thin young lady, followed by her counterpart in all except years, marched into the room and took the table near the window. They were evidently Americans, but Hastings, if he expected any sort of recognition, was disappointed. To be ignored by compatriots intensified his depression. He fumbled with his knife and looked at the plate. The thin young lady was talkative enough. She was quite aware of Hastings' presence, ready to be flattered if he looked at her, but on the other hand, she felt her superiority. For she had been 3 weeks in Paris, and he, it was easy to see, had not yet unpacked his steamer trunk. Her conversation was complacent. She argued with her mother upon the relative merits of the Louvre and the Bon Marché, but her mother's part of the discussion was mostly confined to the observation why Susie, the snuffy old gentleman, had left the room in a body outwardly polite and inwardly raging. They could not endure the Americans who filled the room with their chatter. The big-headed young man looked after them with an annoying cough, murmuring gay old birds. Wow. They look like bad old men, said the girl. Mr. Bladen said to the girl. To this, Mr. Bladen smiled and said, they've had their day. In a tone which implied that he was now having his. And there's the girl, and that's why they all have baggy eyes, cried the girl. I think it's a shame for young gentlemen. Why, Susie, said the mother, and the conversation lagged. After a while, Mr. Bladen threw down the Petit Journal, which he daily studied at the expense of the house, and turned to Hastings, started to make himself agreeable. He began by saying, I see you are an American, to this brilliant and original opening. Hastings, deadly homesick, replied gratefully, and the conversation was judiciously nourished by observations from Miss Susie Byng, distinctively addressed to Mr. Bladen. In the course of events, Miss Susie, forgetting to address herself exclusively to Mr. Bladen, and Hastings replying to her general question, the entente cordiale was established, and Susie and her mother extended a protectorate over what was clearly neutral territory. Mr. Hastings, you must not desert the pension every evening as Mr. Bladen does. Paris is an awful place for young gentlemen, and Mr. Bladen is a horrid cynic. Mr. Bladen looked gratified. Hastings answered, I shall be at the studio all day. And I imagine I shall be glad enough to come back at night. Mr. Bladen, who at a salary of $15 a week acted as an agent for the Pewley Manufacturing Company of Troy, New York, smiled a skeptical smile and withdrew to keep an appointment with a customer on the Boulevard Magenta. Hastings walked into the garden with Miss Bing and Susie, and at their invitation sat down in the shades before the iron gate. The chestnut trees still bore their fragrant spikes of pink and white, and the bees hummed among the roses trellised on the white-walled house. A faint freshness was in the air. The watering carts moved up and down the street, and a clear stream bubbled over the spotless gutter of the Rue de la Grande Chaumière. The sparrows were merry along the curbstones, taking bath after bath in the water, and ruffling their feathers with delight. In a walled garden across the street, a pair of blackbirds whistled among the almond trees. Hastings swallowed the lump in his throat, for the song of the birds and the ripple of the water in a Paris gutter brought back to him the sunny meadows of Millbrook. That's a blackbird, observed Miss Bing. See him there on the bush with the pink blossoms. He's all black except his bill, and that looks as if he has been dipped in an omelette, as some Frenchmen say. Why, Susie, said Miss Bing, that garden belongs to a studio inhabited by 2 Americans, continued the girl serenely, and I often see them pass. They seem to need a great many models, mostly young and feminine. Why, Susie? No, she keeps saying that, bro. Perhaps they prefer painting that kind, but I don't see why they should invite 5 but 3 more young gentlemen and all get into 2 cabs and driveway singing. This street, she continued, is dull. There is nowhere to see except the gardens and a glimpse of the boulevard Montparnasse. They're the Rue de la Grande Chaumière. No one ever passes except a policeman. There's a convent on the corner. I thought it was a Jesuit college, began Hastings, but at once everything was overwhelmed with a Baedeker description of the place, ending on with one side the palatial hotels of Jean-Paul Laurens and Guillaume Bongerot, and opposite the little passage Stanislas Carolus Duran paints the masterpiece which charmed the world. The blackbird burst into a ripple of golden throaty notes, and from some distant spot in the city an unknown wild bird answered with a crazy frenzy, with the frenzy of liquid trills, until the sparrows paused in their ablutions to look up with restless chirps. Then a butterfly came and sat on a cluster of heliotrope and waved his crimson banded wings in the hot sunshine. Hastings knew him for a friend, and before his eyes there came a vision of tall mulleins with scented milkweed alive with painted wings, a vision of a white house and a woodbine covering piazza, A glimpse of a man reading and a woman leaning over the pansy bed. His heart was still full. He's startled a moment later by Miss Bing. I can't believe you're homesick. Hastings blushed. Miss Bings looked up at him with a sympathetic sigh and continued. Whenever I felt homesick, I used to go with Mama and walk in the Luxembourg Gardens. I don't know why, but these old-fashioned gardens seem to bring me nearer home than anything in this artificial city. But they are full of marble statues, said Miss Bing mildly. I don't see the resemblance myself. Where is Luxembourg? Inquired Hastings after a silence. Come with me to the gate, said Miss Bing, and he rose and followed her, and she pointed out the Rue Vavin at the foot of the street. Passed by the convent to the right, she smiled, and Hastings went. Okay, let's read the next chapter. Luxembourg was a blaze of flowers. He walked slowly through the long avenues of trees, past mossy marbles and time-old columns, and threading the grove by the bronze lion, came across the tree-crowned terrace above the fountain. Below lay the basin shining in the sunlight. Flowering almonds encircled the terrace, and in a greater spiral, groves of chestnuts wound in and out, and down among the moist thickets by the western palace wing. At one end, the avenue of trees, the observatory rose, its white domes piled up like an Eastern mosque. At the other end stood the heavy palace, with every window pane ablaze in the fierce sun of June. Around the fountain, children and white-capped nurses armed with bamboo poles were pushing toy boats, whose sails hung limp in the sunshine. A park policeman, wearing red epaulettes and a dress sword, watched them for a while and then went away to remonstrate with a young man who had unchained his dog. The dog was then pleasantly occupied in rubbing grass and dirt into his back while his legs waved in the air. The policeman pointed at the dog. He was speechless with indignation. Well, Captain, smiled the young fellow. Well, Monsieur Student, growled the policeman. What do you come and complain to me for? If you don't chain him, I'll take him, shouted the policeman. What's that to me, mon capitaine? What? Isn't that bulldog yours? If it was, don't you suppose I'd chain him? The officer glared for a moment in silence, then deciding that as he was a student, he was wicked, grabbed at the dog, who promptly dodged. Around and around the flower bed they raced, and when the officer came too near for comfort, the bulldog cut across the flower bed, which perhaps was not playing fair. The young man was amused, and the dog also seemed to enjoy the exercise. The policeman noticed this and decided to strike at the fountainhead of the evil. He stormed up to the student and said, "As the owner of this public nuisance, I arrest you." "But," objected the other, "I disclaimed the dog." That was a poser. It was useless to attempt to catch the dog until the three gardeners lent a hand, but then the dog simply ran away and disappeared in the Rue de Medici. The policeman shambled off to find consolation among the white-capped nurses, and the student looked at his watch, stood up yawning. And catching sight of Hastings, he smiled and bowed. Hastings walked over to the marble, laughing. "Why, Clifford," he said, "I didn't recognize you. It's my moustache," sighed the other. "I sacrificed it to humor the whim of a friend. What do you think of my dog? Then he is yours?" "Of course." It's a pleasant change for him, this playing tag with a policeman, but he is known now and I'll have to stop it. He's gone home. He always does when the gardeners take a hand. It's a pity. He's fond of rolling on lawns. Then he chatted for a moment on Hastings' prospects, and Clifford politely offered to stand his sponsor at the studio. You see, old Dr. Byram told me about you before I met you, explained Clifford, and Elliot and I will be glad to do anything we can. Then looking at his watch again, he muttered, I have just 10 minutes. To catch the Versailles train, au revoir, and he starts to go. But catching sight of a girl advancing by the fountain, took off his hat with a confused smile. Why are you not at Versailles? She said, with an almost imperceptible acknowledgement of Hastings' presence. I'm going, murmured Clifford. For a moment they faced each other, and then Clifford, very red, stammered, with your permission, I have the honor of presenting to you my friend Monsieur Hastings. Hastings bowed low. She smiled very sweetly, but there was something of malice in the quiet inclination of her small Parisian head. I could have wished, she said, that Monsieur Clifford might spare me more time when he brings with him so charming an American. Must I go, Valentine? Began Clifford. Certainly, she replied. Clifford took his leave with very bad grace, wincing when she added, and give my dearest love to Cecile, as he disappeared in the Rue d'Assas. The girl turned as if to go, but suddenly remembered Hastings, looked at him and shook her head. Monsieur Clifford is so perfectly harebrained, she smiled. It is embarrassing sometimes. You have heard, of course, all about his success at the salon. He looked puzzled and she noticed it. You have been to the salon, of course. Why, no, he answered. I only arrived in Paris 3 days ago. She seemed to pay little heed to his explanation, but continued. Nobody imagined he had the energy to do anything good, but on vanishing day, the salon was astonished by the entrance of Monsieur Clifford, who strolled about as bland as you please with an orchid on his buttonhole and a beautiful picture on the line. She smiled to herself at the reminiscence and looked at the fountain. Monsieur Bouguereau told me that Monsieur Julien was so astonished that he only shook hands with Monsieur Clifford in a dazed manner, and actually forgot to pat him on the back. Fancy, she continued with much merriment. Fancy Papa Julien forgetting to pat one on the back, hastened wondering at her acquaintance with the great Bouguereau looked at her with respect. I ask, she said diffidently, whether you are a pupil of Monsieur Bouguereau. She said in some surprise, and she looked at him curiously. Was he permitting himself the liberty of joking on such a short acquaintance? His pleasant, serious face questioned hers. Tiens, she thought, what a droll man. You surely study art, he said. She leaned back on the crooked stick of her parasol. I looked at him. Why do you think so? Because you speak as if you did. You're making fun of me, she said, and it is not in good taste. She stopped, confused, as he colored to the roots of his hair. How long have you been in Paris? She said at length. 3 days, he replied gravely. But surely you are not a nouveau. You speak French too well. Then after a pause, really you are a nouveau? I am, he said. She sat down by the marble bench lately occupied by Clifford and tilting her parasol over her small head, looked at him. I don't believe it. He felt the compliment and for a moment hesitated to declare himself one of the despised. Then, mustering up the courage, he told her how new and green he was, with a frankness that made her blue eyes open very wide. and her lips part in the sweetest of smiles. You have never seen a studio? Never. Nor a model? No. How funny, she said solemnly, and they both laughed. And you, have you seen studios? Hundreds. And models? Millions. And you know Bouguereau? Yes, and Henner, and Constant, and Lawrence, and Pauves, de Chavannes, and Dagnan, and Cortaz, and all the rest of them. And yet you say you are not an artist. Pardon, she said gravely. Did I say I was not? Won't you tell me? He hesitated. At first she looked at him, shaking her head and smiling. Then all of a sudden her eyes fell and she began tracing figures with her parasol in the gravel beneath her feet, at her feet. Feet. Yum. Hastings had taken a place on the seat and now, with his elbows on his knees, sat watching the spray drifting above the fountain jet. A small boy dressed as a sailor stood poking his yacht and crying, I won't go home, I won't go home. His nurse raised her hands to heaven, just like a little American boy, thought Hastings, and a pang of homesickness hit him, shot through him. Presently the nurse captured the boat and the small boy. And the small boy backed away scowling. Or, Monsieur Rene, when you come to back, you can have your boat. The boy backed away. He's giving my boat, I say, he cried. And don't call me Rene, for my name's Randall, and you know it. Hello, said Hastings. Randall, that's English. I'm American, announced the boy in perfectly good English, turning to look at Hastings. And she's such a fool. She calls me Rene because Mama calls me Ranny. Here he dodged the exasperated nurse and took up, and catching him around the waist, lifted him onto his lap. One of my countrymen, he said to the girl beside him. He smiled while he spoke, but there was a queer feeling in his throat. Don't you see the stars and stripes on my yacht? Demanded Randall. Sure enough, the American's collar hung limply under the nurse's arm. Oh, cried the girl, he is charming, and impulsively stooped to kiss him, but the infant Randall wriggled out of Hastings' arms, and his nurse pounced upon him with an angry glance at the girl. She reddened and then bit her lip at the nurse, with eyes still fixed on her, dragging the child away, and ostentatiously wiped his lips with a handkerchief. She then stole a look at Hastings and bit her lip again. What an ill-tempered woman. In America, most nurses are flattered when people kiss their children. For an instant, she tipped the parasol to hide her feet, then closed it with a snap and looked at him defiantly. Do you think strange that she objected? Why not? She asked in surprise. Again, she looked at him with quick, searching eyes. His eyes were clear and bright, and he smiled back, repeating, Why not? You are droll, she murmured, bending her head. Why? But she made no answer and stayed silent, tracing curves and circles in the dust with her parasol. After a while, she said, I'm glad to see young people have so much liberty here. I understood how the French were not all like us. You know, in America, or at least where I go in Millbrook, girls have every liberty to go out alone and receive their friends alone. I was afraid that I should miss it here, but I see how it is now, and I'm glad I was mistaken. She raised her eyes to his and kept them there. He continued pleasantly, pretty girls walking along the terrace, and you are alone too. Tell me, for I do not know French customs, do you have the liberty of going to the theater without a chaperone? For a long time she studied his face, and then with a trembling smile said, Why do you ask me? Because you must know, of course, he said gaily. Yes, she replied indifferently, I know. He waited for an answer, but getting none, decided that perhaps she had misunderstood him. I hope you don't think I mean to presume on our short acquaintance. In fact, it's very odd that I don't know your name. When Mr. Clifford presented me, he only mentioned mine. Is this the custom with France? It's the custom in Latin Quarter, she said with a queer look in her eyes. Then she suddenly began talking more feverishly. You must know, Monsieur Hastings, that we are all un passants Chen. Here in the Latin Quarter, we are very bohemian, and etiquette and ceremony are out of place. It was for that Monsieur Clifford presented you to me with a small ceremony, and left us together for less. Only for that I'm his friend, and I'm his friend. And I have many friends in the Latin Quarter, and we all know each other very well. And I'm not studying art, but what? He said, bewildered. I shall not tell you. It is a secret, she said with an uncertain smile. On both cheeks a pink spot was burning, and her eyes were very bright. Then, in a moment, her face fell. Do you know Monsieur Clifford very intimately? Not very. After a while, she turned to him, grave and a little pale. My name is Valentine Tissot. Might I ask a service of you on very short acquaintance? Oh, he cried, I should be honored. It is only this, I said gently. It is not much. Promise me not to speak to Monsieur Clifford about me. Promise me that you will speak to no one about me. I promise, he said, greatly puzzled. She laughed nervously. I wish to remain a mystery. It is a caprice. But he began, I have wished, I had hoped you might give Monsieur Clifford permission to bring me present at your house. Why? My house, she repeated. I mean where you live. In fact, to present me to your family. The change in his girl's face shocked him. I beg your pardon, he cried. I have hurt you. And quick as a flash, she understood him because she was a woman. My parents are dead, she said. Presently, he began again very gently. Would it displease you if I beg you to receive me? Is it the custom? I cannot, she answered. Then glancing up at him, I'm sorry. I should like to, but believe me, I cannot. He bowed seriously and looked vaguely uneasy. It isn't because I don't wish to. I like you. You're kind to me. Kind, he cried, surprised and puzzled. I like you, and we'll see each other sometimes if you will. At friends' houses? No, not at friends' houses. Where? Here, she said with defiant eyes. Why, he cried, in Paris you're much more liberal in your views than we are. She looked at him curiously. Yes, we are very bohemian. I think it is charming, he declared. You see, we shall be in the best of society, she ventured timidly. The pretty gesture towards the statue of the dead queens, ranged in stately ranks of the terrace. He looked at her delighted as she brightened. Success of her little pleasantry. Indeed, I shall be well chaperoned. Because you see, we are under the protection of the gods themselves. Look. There are Apollo and Juno and Venus on their pedestals, counting them on her small gloved fingers. And Ceres, Hercules, and, well, but I can't make out. Hastings turned to look up at the winged god under whose shadow they seated. Why, it's love, he said. Okay. Boring. Alright, I'm just pause this video and scroll TikTok for a while. Give me a sec. Alright, hello. There, is that a M or a T or a what? Can't be an M. That's a T. It's an I. There is a Nouveau here, drawed Lafat. Leaning around his easel and addressing his friend. Oh, no space between his and friend. Oh, it's a typing error. I'm gonna have to get a refund on this book. There's a Nouveau here who is so tender and green and appetizing that heaven help him if he should fall into a salad bowl. Hayseed, inquired Bowles, plastering in a background with a broken palette knife and squinting at the effect with approval. Yes, Squeedunk or Oshkosh. Isn't Oshkosh like a clothing brand? Whatever. And how he ever grew up among the daisies and escaped the cow, heaven alone knows. Bolus rubbed his thumbs across the outlines of his study to throw in a little atmosphere. As he said, glared at the model, pulled at his pipe, and finding it out, struck a match on his neighbor's back to relight it. His name, continued Lafat, hurling a bit of bread at the hay rack. His name is Hastings. He is a berry. He knows no more about the world. And here Mr. Lafat's face spoke volumes for his own knowledge of the planet, that planet. Then a mating cat on its first moonlight stroll. Bolas, now having succeeded in lighting his pipe, repeated the thumb touch on the other edge of the study and said, Ah, yes, continued his friend. And would you imagine it, he seems to think that everything here goes on as it does in his, is this supposed to be damned little backwoods ranch at home. Talks about the pretty girls who walk alone in the street, says how sensible it is, and how French parents are misrepresented in America. Says that for his part he finds French girls, and he confessed to only knowing one, as jolly as American girls. I tried to set him right, tried to give him a pointer as to what sorts of ladies walk about alone or with students, and he was either too stupid or too innocent to catch on. Then I gave it to him straight, and he said I was a vile-minded fool and marched off. Did you assist him with your shoe? Inquired Balls, languidly interested. Well, no. He called you a vile-minded fool. He was correct, said Clifford from his easel in front. What? What do you mean? Demanded Lafat, turning red. That, replied Clifford. Who spoke to you? Is this your business? Sneered Bowles, but nearly lost his balance. As Clifford swung about and eyed him. Yes, he said slowly, it's my business. No one spoke for some time. Then Clifford sang out, I say Hastings, and when Hastings left his easel and came around, he nodded toward the astonished Lafat. This man has been disagreeable to you, and I want to tell you that any time you feel inclined to kick him, I will hold the other creature. Hastings, embarrassed, said, Why no, I don't agree with his ideas, nothing more. Clifford said naturally, and slipping his arm through Hastings, strolled about with him and introduced him to several of his own friends. Which Lenovo opened their eyes with envy, and the studio was given to understand that Hastings, although prepared to do any menial work as the latest Novo, was already within the charmed circle of the old, respected, and feared. The truly great. The rest finished, the model resumed his place, and work went on in a chorus of songs and yells and every ear-splitting noise which the art student utters when studying the beautiful. 5 o'clock struck, the model yawned, stretched, and climbed into his trousers, and the noisy contents of all 6 studios crowded through the hall and down into the street. 10 minutes later, Hastings found himself on top of a Montrogue tram, and shortly afterward was joined by Clifford. They climbed down at the Rue Gay-Lussac. Oh, stop here, observed Clifford. I like the walk through Luxembourg. By the way, said Hastings, how can I call on you when I don't know where you live? Why, I live opposite you. What, the studio in the gardens where the almond trees are and the blackbirds? Exactly, said Clifford. I'm with my friend Elliot. Hastings thought of this description of the 2 American artists which he had heard from Miss Susie Bing and looked blank. Clifford continued, Perhaps you had better let me know when you think of coming, so that I will be able to be there. He ended rather lamely. I shouldn't care to meet any of your model friends there, said Hastings, smiling. You know, my ideas are rather straight-laced. I suppose you would say puritanical. I shouldn't enjoy it and wouldn't know how to behave. Oh, I understand, said Clifford, but he added with great cordiality. I'm sure we'll be friends, although you may not approve of me and my set, but you will like Severn and Selby because, well, they're like yourself, old chap. After a moment, he continued, there's something I want to speak about. You see, when I introduced you last week in Luxembourg to Valentine. Not a word, cried Hastings, smiling. You must not tell me a word of her. Why, no, not a word, he said gaily. I insist. Promise me upon your honor you will not speak of her until I give you permission. Promise. I promise, said Clifford, amazed. She is a charming girl. We had such a delightful chat after you left. And I thank you for presenting me with, but not another word about her until I give you permission. Oh, murmured Clifford. Remember your promise, he smiled as he turned into the gateway. Clifford strolled across the street and traversed the ivy-colored alley, entering his garden. He felt for his studio key, muttering, I wonder, but of course he doesn't. He entered the hallway and, fitting the key over the door, stood staring at the 2 cards tacked over the panel. The panels. Foxhall Clifford and Richard Osborne Elliot. Why the devil doesn't he want me to speak of her? He opened the door and discouraged the carcasses of two brindle bulldogs, sat down on the sofa. Oh. Elliot sat smoking and sketching with a piece of charcoal by the window. Hello, he said, without looking around. Clifford gazed absently at the back of his head, murmuring, I'm afraid that man is too innocent. I say, Elliot, he said at last. Hastings, you know the old chap that old Tabby Byram came around to tell us the day you had to hide Colette in the armory? Yes, what's up? Oh, nothing. He's a brick. Yes, said Elliot without enthusiasm. Don't you think so? Demanded Clifford. Why, yes, he's gonna have a tough time when some of his illusions are dispelled. More shame to those who dispel them. Yes, wait until he comes to pay his call on us, unexpectedly, of course. Clifford looked virtuous and lighted a cigar. I was just going to say, he observed. I've asked him not to come without letting us know, so I can postpone any orgy you may have intended. Holy. Restaurants out here having orgies. Can I join? Can I come? Pause. Ah, said Elliot indignantly. I suppose you put it to him in that way. Not exactly, grinned Clifford. Then more seriously, I don't want anything to occur here to bother him. He's a brick and it's a pity we can't be more like him. I am, observed Elliot complacently, only living with you. Listen, cried the other, I managed to put my foot in it with great style. Do you know what I've done? Well, the first time I met him in the street, or rather it was in the Luxembourg, I introduced him to Valentine. Did he object? Believe me, said Clifford sullenly. This rustic Hastings has no idea that Valentine is Valentine, and he has that himself is a beautiful example of moral decency in a quarter where morals are as rare as elephants. Heard enough in conversation between that blackguard Lofat and that little immoral eruption Bowles to open my eyes. Tell you Hastings is a trump. He's a healthy, clean-minded young fellow bred in a small country village, brought up with the idea that saloons are way stations to hell. And as for women, well, demanded Elliot. Well, said Clifford, his idea of the dangerous woman is probably a painted Jezebel. Probably, replied the other. He's a trump, said Clifford, and he swears the world is as good as pure as his own heart. I'll swear he's right. Elliot rubbed his charcoal on his file to get a point and turned to his sketch, saying he will never hear any pessimism from Richard Osborne's E. I don't understand. Is Valentine's like a prostitute or something? He's a lesson to me, said Clifford. Then he unfolded a small perfumed note, written on rose-colored paper, which had been lying on the table before him. He read it, smiled, whistled a bar or two for Miss Halliet, and sat down to answer it on his best cream-laid notepaper. When it was written and sealed, he picked up his stick and marched up and down the studio 2 or 3 times, whistling. Going out, inquired the other, without turning. Yes, he said, but lingered a moment over Elliot's shoulder, watching him pick out the lights in his sketch with a bit of bread. Tomorrow is Sunday, he observed after a moment's silence. Well, inquired Elliot, have you seen Colette? No, I will tonight. She and Rowden and Jacqueline are coming to Boulant's. Suppose you and Cecile will be there? Well, no, replied Clifford. Cecile dines at home tonight. And I had an idea of going to Mignon's. Elliot looked at him with disapproval. You can make all the arrangements for La Roche without me, he continued, avoiding Elliot's eyes. What are you up to now? Nothing, protested Clifford. Don't tell me, replied his chum with scorn. Fellows don't rush. Fellows don't rush off to Mignon's when the set dine at Boulant's. Who is it now? But no, I won't ask that. What's the use? Then he lifted up his voice in complaint and beat upon the table with his pipe. What's the use of ever trying to keep track of you? What will Cecile say? Oh, yes, what will she say? It's a pity. You can't be constant 2 months. Yes, by Jove. And the quarter is indulgent, but you abuse his good nature and mine too. Presently he arose and, jamming his hat on his head, marched to the door. Heaven alone knows why anyone puts up with your antics, but they all do, and so do I. If I was Cecile or any of the other pretty fools after whom you have toddled, and will, in all human probabilities, continue to toddle, I say if I were Cecile, I would spank you. Now I'm going to Boulant's, and as usual, I shall make excuses for you and arrange the affair. But I don't care a continental where you are going, but by the skull of the studio skeleton, if you don't turn up tomorrow with your sketching kit under one arm and Cecile under the other, if you don't turn up in good shape, I'm done with you, and the rest can think what they please. Good night. Clifford said good night with as pleasant a smile as he could muster, and then sat with his eyes on the door. He took out his watch and gave Elliot 10 minutes to vanish, then rang the concierge's call, murmuring, oh dear, why the devil do I do it? Alfred, he said, as the gimlet-eyed person answered the call. Make yourself clean and proper, Alfred, and replace your sabots with a pair of shoes. and put on your best hat and take this letter to the big white house in the Rue de Dragon. There is no answer, mon petit Alfred. The concierge departed with a snort, in which unwillingness for the errand and affection for Mr. Clifford, Monsieur Clifford, were blended. Then, with great care, the young fellow arrayed himself in all the beauties of his and Elliot's wardrobe. He took his time about it, and occasionally interrupted his toilet to play his banjo or make pleasing diversions for the bulldogs by gambling about on all fours. I've got 2 hours before me, he thought, and borrowed a pair of Elliot's silken foot gear, with which he and the dogs played ball until he decided to put them on. Then he lighted a cigarette and inspected his dress coat. When he had emptied it of 4 handkerchiefs, a fan, and a pair of crumpled gloves as long as his arm, he decided it was not suited to add éclat to his charms, and cast about in his mind for a substitute. Elliot was too thin, and anyway his coats were now under lock and key. Rowden probably was badly off himself. Hastings was the man, but when he threw on a smoking jacket and sauntered to Hastings' house, he was informed that he had been gone for over an hour. Now, where in the name of all that is reasonable could he have gone? Muttered Clifford, looking down the street. The maid didn't know, so he bestowed her a fascinating smile, and lounged back to the studio. Hastings was not far away. The Luxembourg is within 5 minutes' walk of the Rue Notre Dame des Champs. And there sat under the shadow of a winged god. There he had sat for an hour, poking holes in the dust and watching the steps which lead from the northern terrace to the fountain. The sun hung, a purple globe above the misty hills of Meudon. Long streamers of clouds touched with rose swept low on the western skies, and the dome of the distant Invalides burned with like an opal through the haze. Behind the palace, yo, this guy's doing too much fucking describing, bruh. This book's looking boring as fuck. Just describing scene after scene and people falling in love and then dying. Like, this just ass, bruh. Anyway, I better hurry up and finish freaking reading it. Long streams of clouds, St. Sulpice rose in ever-deepening silhouette. A sleepy blackbird was caroling in some near thicket, and pigeons passed and repassed. With the whisper of soft winds in their wings, the light on the palace windows had died away, and the dome of the Pantheon swam aglow in the northern terrace, a fiery Valhalla in the sky, while below in grim arrays along the terrace ranged the marble ranks of queens looked out into the west. From the end of the long walk by the northern facade of the palace came the noise of omnibuses and the cries of the street. Hastings looked at the palace clock. 6, and his own watch agreed with it. He fell to poking holes in the gravel again. A constant stream of people passed between the Odeon and the fountains, priests in black with silver-buckled shoes, lines-shouldered soldiers, slouchy and rakish, neat girls without hats, bearing milliners' boxes, students with black portfolios and high hats, students with berets and big canes, nervous, quick-stepping officers, symphonies in turquoise and silver, ponderous, jangling cavalrymen all over dust, pastry cooks' boys skipping along with utter disregard for the safety of the basket balanced on the impish head, and then the lean outcast, the shambling Paris tramp, shouting, slouching with shoulders bent, and little eye furtively scanning the ground for smokers' refuse. All these moved in a steady stream across the fountain circle, out into the city where Odeon, whose long arcades were now beginning to flicker with gas jets, the melancholy bells of St. Sulpice struck the hour, and the clock tower of the palace lighted up. Shouldn't it be like lit up? Then hurried steps sounded across the gravel, and Hastings raised his head. How late you are. I just remembered something really bad. Oh my god, my fucking head. I was kept indeed. I was so much annoyed, and I may only stay a moment. She sat down beside him, casting a furtive glance over her shoulder at the god upon his pedestal. What a nuisance, those intruding cupids still here. Wings and arrows too, said Hastings, unheeding her motion to be seated. Wings, she murmured, oh yes, to fly away with when he's tired of his play. Of course, it was a man who conceived the ideas of wings, otherwise Cupid would have been insupportable. Oh, do you think so? Ma foi, it's what women think, it's what men think, and women... Oh, she said with a toss of her small toe. I really forget what we were speaking of. We were speaking of love, said Hastings. I was not, said the girl. Then looking up at the marble god, I don't care for this one at all. I don't believe he knows how to shoot his arrows. No, indeed, he is a coward. Creeps up like an assassin in the twilight, and I don't approve of cowardice. She announced and turned her back on the statue. I think, said Hastings quietly, that he does shoot fairly. Yes, and even gives one warning. Is your experience, Monsieur Hastings? He looked straight into her eyes and said, he is warning me. Heed the warning, then, she cried with a nervous laugh, as soon as she stripped off her gloves, then carefully proceeded to draw them on again. When this was accomplished, she glanced at the palace clock, saying, oh dear, how late it is. Furled her umbrella, then unfurled it, and finally looked at him. No, he said, I should not heed his warning. Oh dear, she sighed again, still talking about that tiresome statue. Then stealing a glance at his face, I suppose you are in love. I don't know, he muttered. I suppose I am. She raised her head with a quick gesture. He seemed delighted by that idea. She said, but bit her lip and trembled as his eyes met hers. Then sudden fear came over her, and she sprang up, staring into the gathering shadows. Are you cold? He said, she only answered, oh dear, so late. It's late, so late. I must go, have a good night. She gave him her gloved hand for a moment and withdrew with a start. What is it? He insisted. Are you frightened? She looked at him strangely. No, not frightened. You are very good to me. By Jove, he burst out. What do you mean by saying I'm good to you? That's at least the third time, and I don't understand. The sound of a drum from the guardhouse at the palace cut him short. Listen, she whispered. They're gonna close. It's late. Oh, so late. The rolling of the drum came nearer and nearer, and the silhouette of the drummer cut the sky above the eastern terrace. Fading light lingered a moment on his belt and bayonet. Then he passed into the shadows, drumming the echoes awake. The roll became fainter along the eastern terrace, then grew and rattled with increasing sharpness when he passed the avenue by the bronze lion and turned down the western terrace walk. Louder and louder the drums sounded, and the echoes struck back the notes from the gray palace wall. And now the drummer loomed up before them, his red trousers a dull spot in the gathering gloom. The brass of his drum and bayonet touched with a pale spark, his epaulettes tossing on his shoulders. He passed, leaving the crash of the drum in their ears, and far into the alley of trees he struck his little tin cup shining on his haversack. Then the sentinels began the monotonous cry, on firme, on ferme, and the bugle blew the barracks in the Rue du Tournon. On ferme. Good night, she whispered. I must return alone tonight. My fucking pages are left, bro. Four pages left. 4 pages, and then I'm wrapping this up, bro. That's boring. I mean, I'll fucking read it tomorrow or something, but, you know, I guess it was foolish of me to think I could finish it all in one day. It was like 100 extra pages. Also, could you give me a moment? Actually, I'll just pause the thing. He watched her until she reached the northern terrace. And sat down on the marble seat until a hand on his shoulder and a glimmer of bayonets warned him away. She passed on through the grove and turned into the Rue de Medici. Traversed it to the boulevard. At the corner, she bought a bunch of violets and walked on along the boulevard to the Rue des Écoles. A cab was drawn up before Boulan's, and a pretty girl, hated by Elliot, jumped out. Valentine, cried the girl. Come with us. I can't, she said, stopping a moment. I have a rendezvous at Mignon's. Not Victor, cried the girl, laughing, but she passed with a low shiver, nodding good night. Turned into the Boulevard Saint-Germain. Oh, cock. She walked a little... She walked a little faster to escape a gay party. Wow, homophobic, much. Sitting before the Café Cluny, who called to her to join them. At the door of the restaurant Mignon stood a guy in buttons. Wow, racist book. Okay, well, whatever. Took off his peaked cap as she mounted the carpeted stairs. Send Eugene to me, she said at the office, and passing through the hallway to the right of the dining room, stopped before a row of paneled doors. A waiter passed, and she repeated her demand for Eugene, who presently appeared, noiselessly skipping, and bowed, murmuring, Madame, who is here? No one in the cabinets, Madame. In the hall, Madame Madelon and Monsieur Gay, Monsieur de Clamart, Monsieur Clisson, Madame Marie, and their set. He looked around and bowed again, murmured, Monsieur awaits Madame since half an hour, and he knocked at one of the paneled doors bearing the number 6. Clifford opened the box and the girl entered. The garçon bowed her in and whispered, Well, Monsieur, have the goodness to ring. Vanished. He helped her off with her jacket and took her hat and umbrella. When she was seated at the little table with Clifford opposite, smiled and leaned forward. With elbows looking him in the face. What are you doing here? She demanded. Waiting, he replied in accents of adoration. For an instant she turned and examined herself in the glass. The wide blue eyes, the curling hair, the straight nose, and short curled lip flashed in the mirror an instant only, and then its depths reflected her pretty back and neck. Thus do I turn my back on vanity, she said, and leaning forward again, she said, What are you doing here? Waiting for you, repeated Clifford, slightly troubled. It's a seal. Now don't, Valentine. Do you know, she said calmly, I dislike your conduct. He was a little disconcerted and rang for Eugene to cover his confusion. The soup was bisque and the wine pommery. The courses followed by each other with the usual regularity until Eugene brought coffee and there was nothing left on the table but a small silver lamp. Valentine, said Clifford, having obtained permission to smoke, it is the Vaudeville or the El Dorado or both, or the Nouveau Clique or Cirque or it is here, said Valentine. Well, he said, greatly flattered. I'm afraid I couldn't amuse you. Oh, yes, you're funnier than the El Dorado. Now, see here, don't guy me, Valentine. You always do. And you know what they say, a good laugh kills. What? Her love and all that. She laughed until her eyes were moist with tears. Tiens, she cried. He's dead then. Clifford eyed her with a growing alarm. Do you know why I came? She said. No, he replied uneasily. I don't. How long have you made love to me? Well, he admitted, somewhat startled. I should say for about a year. For a year, are you not tired? He did not answer. Don't you know that I like you too well to ever fall in love with you? She said. Don't you know we are two good comrades, two old friends for that? And were we not? Do you think I do not know your history, Monsieur Clifford? Don't be so sarcastic, he urged. Don't be unkind, Valentine. I'm not. I'm kind. I'm very kind to you and Cecile. Cecile is tired of me. I hope she is, said the girl, for she deserves a better fate. Tiens. Or do you know of your reputation in the quarter of the inconstant? The most inconstant, utterly incorrigible, and no more serious than a gnat on a summer night. Poor Cecile. Clifford looked so uncomfortable that she spoke more kindly. I like you, you know that. Everyone does. You're a spoiled child here. Everyone is permitted you and everyone makes allowance, but everyone cannot be a victim to caprice. Caprice, he cried, by Jove. If the girls of the Latin Quarter are not capricious, never mind about that. You must not sit in judgment, you of all men. Why are you here tonight? Oh, she cried, I'll tell you why. Monsieur receives a low note, he sends low answer. He dresses in his conquering raiment. I don't, said Clifford, very red. Also, hold on. Says dresses in conquering raiment. I don't, said Clifford, very red. You do, and it becomes you. She retorted with a faint smile, then again very quietly, I'm in your power, but I know that I'm in the power of a friend. I've come to acknowledge it to you here. And it is because of that I'm here to beg you of a favor. Clifford opened his eyes but said nothing. I'm in great distress of mind. It is Monsieur Hastings. Well, said Clifford in some astonishment, I want to ask you, she continued in a low voice, to ask you to in case you should speak of me before him, not to say, I shall not speak of you to him. He said quietly, can you prevent others? I might if I was present. Can you ask why? That's not fair. She murmurs, you know how he considers me, and he considers every woman. You know how different he is from you and the rest. I've never seen such a man as Monsieur Hastings. He let his cigarette go out unnoticed. I'm almost afraid of him, afraid he should know what we all are in the quarter. Oh, I do not wish for him to know. I do not wish him to turn from me. You and the rest cannot know what it has been to me. I could not believe him. I could not deceive. He was so good and noble. I do not wish for him to know so soon. He will find out sooner or later. He will find out for himself, and then he will turn away from me. Why? She cried passionately. Why should he turn away from me and not from you? Clifford, much embarrassed, eyed his cigarette. The girl rose, very white. He is your friend. You have a right to warn him. He is my friend, he said at length. They looked at each other in silence. Then she cried, by all I hold to me most sacred, you need not warn him. I shall trust you, he said pleasantly. And part 4. Okay. This video's over. Alright, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe or whatever. Alright, bye. I love you.